Majestic Owl Publishing, LLC presents Winds Up, Book 1 from Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. Chapter 1. Living in a small town changed everything. After Matthew died, Hillary Sheridan left everything behind to start over. Sometimes a clean slate was the best medicine, and the sleepy town of Rosemary Harbor, Massachusetts gave her that. Although she missed her husband every day, and she missed the bustling big city vibes back in Miami, she felt fulfilled. Hillary kept busy with something special, a gift basket shop she dreamed of owning as long as she could remember. Something special was the shop with something for everyone, gifts for young and old, loved ones and lovers, and even fun me-time baskets for those who wanted to pamper themselves. The last 5 years of Matthew's life was hard. There was little time and energy to spend on date nights the way they used to, what with the chemo and the rapid decline of his quality of life. Hillary now found pleasure in bringing people happiness, while they still had time to find it. Life was short. Hillary learned to make the most of it, and she thrived on helping others do the same. Something special was the way to do it. Hillary and her daughter Annabelle debuted a new gift basket, and it looked like it was a hit. The date night baskets contained incense sticks, wine, a selection of cheeses and chocolates, and a gift voucher to a local restaurant. Customers could personalize their baskets by choosing among options on a list. It was the perfect date in a box for anyone fresh out of ideas on how to keep the spark alive. Annabelle came up with the idea. Even toward the end, when everything seemed like it was falling apart, her parents' love and dedication to each other was something to admire. She hoped to have a love like that of her own one day, but until then, she tried to make everyone else's relationship a little sweeter. Hillary unlocked something special just after 8 on Monday morning and walked in, switching on the lights. The weather smelled of the ocean. The air was crisp on her tongue and she breathed in. She pulled the cover off the parrot cage and Spot, the green and red Eclectus parrot store mascot, ruffled his feathers. "Top of the morning," he squawked. "Good morning to you too," Hillary said. The parrot belonged to Matthew. He bought Spot as a chick about 20 years ago and hand-reared him. With proper care, Spot could live for another 20 to 30 years, outliving them all with the stress-free life he enjoyed. He added life and humor to the shop. Spot picked up phrases quickly. Sometimes he got Hillary in trouble with customers with his naughty language, but more often than not, his on-the-spot observations resulted in a good laugh. Laughter was the medicine of life, and along with Annabelle, Spot was Hillary's only tie to Matthew now. Hillary put her bag behind the counter below the cash register and walked to the storage room where the new baskets arrived yesterday. When she emerged with 2 baskets in her hands, Rose walked in through the front door. The older woman's gray hair was tied in a bun at her neck, and she wore a dress that looked like it dated from the 50s. She liked to dress up, and despite her vintage style, she always looked put together and approachable. Rose Humbert was in her late 60s and had no reason to be working as a shop assistant, which was what she was at Something Special. She owned most of the buildings along Market Road, including the one Hillary rented for her shop, and had more money than she needed in a place like Rosemary Harbor. But she liked keeping busy, and working at the store always gave her insight into what was happening around town. Rose was a terrible gossip. If anyone wanted to know anything, Rose was the one to go to. "Morning, dear," Rose said to Hillary. "Would a rose by any other name smell as sweet?" Spot squawked and Rose laughed. "You charmer, you," she said to the parrot. Quoting Shakespeare, where did he pick that up? Matthew used to read in the evenings, Shakespeare, Dickinson, Poe. "Sounds beautiful," Rose said. "Gives the parrot an arsenal of charm." "He knows just what to say," Hillary said, smiling at Rose. "Looks like it will be a beautiful day." Spring was in the air with clear skies and budding new leaves everywhere. Valentine's Day was over, but Hillary knew there was plenty of love still doing the rounds. Rose heaved a sigh and shook her head. "Not for Reggie." "Reginald Danvers?" "I heard. It's a terrible thing to have happened." Reginald Danvers was murdered a few days ago. The police kept it quiet for a short while, but nothing stayed secret for long in Rosemary Harbor. Do they know who did it yet? Rose lowered her chin and moved in close. My money's on Jessica, his wife, she said. Hillary gasped. But she's such a sweet woman. She was in here to buy a gift basket for him recently, and we got along so well. I don't believe it. Rose shrugged. People can be all kinds of mean behind closed doors. Hillary refused to believe it. With her husband dead, she wished every day they'd had more time together. She couldn't imagine Jessica Danvers getting rid of her husband, and in such an awful way. Rose shrugged out of her coat and took her handbag to the back room. When she returned, she watched Hillary arrange the new baskets on the shelves. Hillary was deep in thought about the news. I like your hair that way, Rose said. Thanks. Hillary touched her shoulder-length bob. She'd had long hair all her life, but after Matthew, when she moved to start a new life somewhere else, she'd lopped it all off. Her husband, God bless his soul, had been dead for a few years now, and it was time to pick herself up and move on. Hillary was graying at the roots, but she'd colored her hair a rich auburn, and with a healthy fitness regime, a good diet, and something like the shop to give her something to do, Hillary was in a good place in her life again. She hadn't thought she would ever get to this point after Matthew passed. The front door opened again, the small bell announcing another presence. Morning, Rose, Mom, Annabelle said, walking in. Beautiful day. My sweet Annabelle, Spot squawked, and Annabelle smiled. It was what her dad used to say to her. Hillary smiled, tipping her head so Annabelle could kiss her cheek on her way to the back room. Did you hear about Reginald Danvers? Annabelle asked as she passed. Hillary and Rose both nodded. Let's not talk about it, Hillary added. It brought the pain of losing Matthew back, and Hillary hated focusing on the negative. Annabelle and Rose understood it and respected Hillary's feelings. They weren't just colleagues at the shop, they were friends. I think these baskets are doing well, Hillary said. I agree, Rose said. Just the other day, Maggie Turner stopped me in the grocery aisle and asked me if we're still doing the promotion. She wants to try it on Henry. Henry Yeager? Hillary asked. Isn't he a bit old for her? What is age if it's about love? Rose asked. Hillary chuckled. You're very liberal for a woman your age. Rose shrugged and smiled. What is age? She repeated. Hillary laughed, shaking her head. Who's too old for who? Annabelle asked, coming out of the back room wearing her yellow something special shirt. Henry Yeager. Maggie Turner is sweet on him, Rose said. Annabelle shrugged. I agree with Rose. True love doesn't know age. If they can make it work, they should. Hillary shook her head. Annabelle was a hopeless romantic. She believed in all of it, love at first sight, fate, and was sure that every man she fell in love with was the one. Her heart had been broken too many times. Sometimes Hillary wondered if that's why Annabelle moved to Rosemary Harbor with her. At 24, Annabelle was plenty old enough to have stayed in Miami, and while her daughter insisted she wanted to be where her mother was, Hillary suspected she was running away from yet another heartbreak. How about you? Rose asked Hillary. What about me? Hillary asked. Rose's expression was innocent as she replied, Do you have your eye on someone you can try the basket out on? The best way to deal with new merchandise is to take it for a personal test run, you know. Hillary blushed. Don't be silly, Annabelle said before Hillary could answer. Mom still loves my dad. So? She should find love again. It's been years now. A woman shouldn't be alone. And she's not. She has me. Annabelle didn't sound happy. She was a fierce protector of the love Hillary and Matthew shared. Once you found true love, she believed, you must hold on to it. No matter what. Not even death could break that kind of love. Hillary cleared her throat. You know I'll always love him, sweetheart, she said. No one will ever replace your father. Good, Annabelle said. But if I meet someone, I won't hesitate to fall in love again. It was a good life with Matthew, but I have a lot of living still to do. Annabelle looked shocked. You're kidding, right? How do you think that would make him feel? Annabelle asked. Hillary shook her head. I like to think he wanted me to be happy. And you. Both of us. And if love comes my way. Annabelle shook her head. You can't do that, she said. And why not? Rose chipped in. I was in love twice. I had 2 wonderful husbands. It was unfortunate they were both ripped away from me the way they were, but I loved Donald just as I loved Harry. They were both wonderful men. Fall in love again, Hillary? Life is too short to sit around being a spinster. Heck, I would fall in love again too, if I met the right man. Annabelle looked upset. She pursed her lips and walked behind the counter to roll out the ribbons. Honey, there's nothing wrong with finding happiness again, Hillary said, trying to appease her daughter, but Annabelle wouldn't hear it. I can't believe you'll just forget about him like that. Nonsense, Rose said. In fact, I think it's only right that Hillary finds love again. I will make it my mission to find you a man. That's unnecessary, Hillary said. Shush. It's my new goal. Humor an old woman. Hillary sighed. Annabelle opened her mouth to argue, but the little bell above the door announced a customer, and she bit her tongue. Spot mimicked the sound of the bell. If they didn't look, his mimicking often led them to believe that more than one customer had walked through the door. Or that there was a customer when there was none. Police Chief Preston Davis pushed in through the door. His hazel eyes were bright under very short steel-gray hair, and a smile played on his lips. He looked amused, which was a wonderful disposition for a police officer who had the well-being of his people in mind. Morning, ladies, he said. He looked at Hillary. You look well today. Hillary smiled. Rose watched them. You look good too, Hillary said. Preston was dressed in his uniform, pressed and ready for action. He was an upright man, serious about his job as the law enforcer in town, and had a knack for crime fighting and a memory like nothing you've seen before. He'd been police chief for almost 15 years, and people revered him around town. He knew everyone by name, asked about their children or parents or pets, and he was like a beloved uncle to all. What can I help you with? Hillary asked. Oh, I need a gift for my mother, Preston said. I'm driving out to the senior home this weekend to see her. Right. I've got just the thing. Hillary helped Preston choose a basket, fussing over the different options. They were busy for quite some time, and Rose considered the possibility that Preston was stalling on purpose. He seemed in no hurry once he had Hillary's attention. He decided on a basket with a variety of small scented candles and 2 paperback romance novels, and Hillary rang it up for him. Give Sophia my love, Rose said when Preston paid. I will, Preston said. He turned to Hillary and smiled. Thank you for helping me with this. Women are so difficult to buy gifts for. Candles and books will always do the trick, Hillary said, smiling back. Preston nodded. This is why I came to you for advice. Have a great day. You too, Hillary said. Preston inclined his head and turned toward the door. What a hottie, Spot squawked. Preston chuckled. Is he here to make your customers feel better about themselves? Hillary laughed. He's bored, I think. He knows too many people around town. Rose watched the two for long enough to see that there was something more. She cleared her throat, coming closer. You know, Chief, I have a reservation for tonight at Oregano. I would go with Leonie, but she came down with a head cold and I haven't canceled yet. Don't you want to take it? Hillary and Preston both looked at Rose. Who would I take to Oregano? He asked. Rose shrugged. Hillary might be available. She glanced at Hillary, who glared daggers at her. She's always so busy here at the shop, I can imagine a night out is just the thing she needs. Preston grinned at Hillary, his hazel eyes soft, and Hillary looked down, feeling her face grow warm. It was like they were teenagers all over again. "What do you say?" he asked. "What?" Hillary stammered. "It's promising to be a nice night. Spring is in full swing. Let's go out and enjoy ourselves, forget about work for a bit." "I don't think tonight will work, Preston," Annabelle said. "My mom's tired. Perhaps another time." "Actually, Annabelle," Hillary said, her mind made up now that Annabelle was trying to speak for her, "I think I'd like to get out a bit." "Thank you, Preston." She'd been cooped up for far too long, making life happen without living it. It was time for a change. Preston smiled. "It's a date then." "The reservation is for 7, Rose said. "But—" Annabelle tried, but Rose put her hand on Annabelle's arm to silence her. Annabelle's face was thunderous. As if it wasn't bad enough they'd moved to this godforsaken little town, now her mother would date? "I'll pick you up just before 7, Preston said to Hillary. Hillary agreed. "Why don't you tell me about your date baskets?" he asked Hillary. "I've heard good things around town from a few people who've bought them." Hillary smiled, relieved to have a distraction from her shyness, to have something she could speak about with confidence. Around Preston, she was flustered. "Oh, that's great news," she said. "I'm so glad to hear they're saying good things. We launched them recently and sold quite a few, but I wasn't sure how people liked them. It was Annabelle's idea, you know." "Brilliant," Preston said to Annabelle. She shrugged, looking unhappy. Her mom was going on a date, and she couldn't do anything about it. What would her dad say? If he were here, he would have lost it. But he wasn't here. Which was why this was all happening. If Matthew were still alive, their lives would be different. They would still live in Miami. They would still be a family. Instead, they were stuck in tiny Rosemary Harbor, Massachusetts, and Hillary was going on a date with Police Chief Davis. Annabelle couldn't imagine anything worse. There was no reason for Hillary to go out. It wasn't like she was being worked to death, and Annabelle and her mom went to the beach for a picnic most Sundays, so it wasn't like she had no fun. Besides, if they knew the baskets were working so well, why did Hillary and Preston need to test it? And why did they have to take it to the restaurant if they were already doing a date? It was ridiculous. "Annabelle," Preston said, and she looked at the police chief, trying not to appear too sullen. "What's in your baskets?" She took a deep breath. "Wine, a selection of cheeses, incense sticks to set the mood, kind of thing." When she didn't elaborate, Rose nudged her. "Tell him about the options." She sighed. "We allow our customers to choose what they want from a list for each product." She walked to the counter where Hillary was still staring at Preston. She rolled her eyes at her mom before she found the list and showed Preston. "So you can build your own basket?" he asked. "That's the idea," Annabelle said, trying hard not to be hostile. It wasn't Preston's fault he was interested in her mother. Hillary was a catch, a wonderful older woman in great shape with a positive outlook on life. No, the police chief only had good taste. It was Hillary's interest in Preston that irritated her. It convinced her it was wrong. "Where do you order your supplies from?" he asked. Annabelle wished the man would just leave. She forced a smile, the customer was always right. "From various places. Most of it we order from Rodney Bay." Rodney Bay was only a short distance away, a tourist town bigger than Rosemary Harbor, with a large industrial area behind it. They supplied many things, and it was the general go-to whenever there was a shortage at Rosemary Harbor. Preston should have known this, Annabelle thought. He was just being polite, making conversation to include her, instead of talking only to her mother. If Preston wasn't taking her mom out on a date she shouldn't have agreed to, Annabelle would even have been impressed with Preston's ability to make everyone feel so at ease and included. "Do you get all the candles in Rodney Bay too?" "Where from?" "Why so many questions about the supplies?" Hillary asked. "Everything we use is good quality." Police Chief Davis nodded. "Oh, I knew that. Well, I want to find out more about the baskets and the contents." He trailed off. When the three women blinked at him, Preston took a deep breath and hesitated, as if trying to decide. Finally, he spoke. Well, I came to your shop for a reason. Not just for my mother's gift. We're investigating a crime, and I'm just trying to find some leads. That's all, he said. It's about poor Reggie, isn't it? Rose said. Jessica bought a basket for him before he died. That's what it's about. I know it. Rose's interest was piqued. If there was a story, she wanted to know about it. It's nothing I'm at liberty to talk about, Preston said. It's early in the investigation. We're still trying to find direction. Hillary's eyes widened in alarm. Wait. This crime involved our gift baskets? She asked. When Preston asked about the date baskets, she'd entertained he might want to try one out with her, but if this was about a crime, it could mean bad business for them. Has someone said something? Surely you can't kill someone with a gift basket? The last statement was meant to be a joke, but it came out a little frantic, and when Preston looked uncomfortable, a feeling of dread made Hillary's stomach tighten. Rose was quiet, waiting for Preston to tell them. She ached with curiosity. Annabelle was quiet too. We know little of anything, Preston said, hedging. He might have said too much already. In a place like Rosemary Harbor, gossip ran like wildfire, and it was so important to keep a lid on things until it was the right time. Mentioning the crime now might not have been the right time, with Rose in the room. He loved Rose. She was involved in a lot of community events and fundraisers, and did a lot of good for the town, but boy, the woman could talk. I wish you would tell me what's going on, Hillary said. She was growing more and more nervous. Don't worry about it, Preston told her. I'll let you know the moment there's something to tell. For now, I'm just sniffing around. Really, there's nothing for you to worry about. Something smells fishy to me, Spot squawked, and Hillary agreed. Preston shuffled from one foot to the other. Ladies, I must be off. Hillary, I'll pick you up just before 7 tonight. Thank you for all your help. Preston left the shop in a hurry, and the three women were left behind with a lot to speculate about. Chapter 2. At 10 to 7 that evening, Preston picked Hillary up. She opened the door wearing a dress she used to wear out on dates with Matthew. It felt good to wear it again. The dress was a spring green, and everyone always told her it brought out her emerald eyes. It was why she'd chosen it. Hillary was nervous. She hadn't been on a date in a long time. You look great, Preston said when he saw her. He was wearing a pair of new jeans he'd hardly worn, a flannel shirt he'd tucked in, and a windbreaker. They walked to his police cruiser, and Preston opened the door for Hillary. As he closed the door behind her and walked around the car, Hillary watched him tug at his pants. Preston was uncomfortable in his clothes, not used to being in anything other than a uniform. When he got into the driver's side, they rode the short distance to Oregano in awkward silence. Preston fiddled the whole time, and Hillary kept her eyes trained on the town sliding past until they parked. When they walked into the restaurant and sat down, Hillary cleared her throat. I think we need to clear something out of the way, she said. This feels a little awkward, so I think we should talk about it. Communication is a big deal, right? Preston nodded, not knowing what to expect. Rose kind of caught me off guard when she set us up. I know this looks a lot like a date. We're all dressed up and nervous. But I don't think I'm ready for romance yet. My husband just died a few years ago, as you know, and I haven't dated at all since then. I want to be friends, though. Preston nodded slowly. I see, he said. This was a date in his mind, and he had been planning to show Hillary a good time. She was still new to Rosemary Harbor, and he wanted her to see a different side of him, the side that didn't fight crime and have the best interests of every citizen at heart. Just friends, Hillary confirmed. Then she added, at least for now. It was too soon after Matthew. It had upset Annabelle, and while Hillary was determined to do what she wanted, despite her daughter's view on things, she didn't want to jump into something serious. Preston looked around the restaurant, thinking about what Hillary said. Now that she had laid down the law, he wanted to break it. He wanted to flirt with her, pursue her. It was ironic that Preston wanted to do the opposite of what he was told, considering who and what he was in this town. But there it was. He had a streak in him that made him want to go against what he was told. He wanted to convince Hillary to take a chance, to live a little. Preston had never backed down from a challenge. It was what made him such a good cop. He was good at following a hunch, at finding the truth no matter how hard it was. And he felt like he was up to this latest challenge, getting Hillary interested in him as more than just a friend. Preston had noticed Hillary the moment she'd arrived in town with her daughter. He had wanted to ask her out, but wasn't sure when the time would be right. So when Rose offered him her reservation to use with Hillary, he jumped at it. The moment Hillary got her feelings off her chest, the atmosphere between them lightened, and she had a good time. They ordered drinks and the pasta of the day, and as they sat and talked, the restaurant filled up more and more. "Are you enjoying it here in Rosemary Harbor?" Preston asked. "Very much. Everyone here is so welcoming and kind. It's been so easy to fit right in, and I feel like I'm a part of a big family." Preston nodded. There was something about Rosemary Harbor that was warm and inviting. Everyone passing through commented on it, and the few times people stayed, they never left again. "Have you made many friends?" Preston asked. Hillary shook her head. "Not really yet. Besides Rose, I wouldn't say I have many friends. I've gotten to know quite a few people with the traffic in the shop, but I don't know everyone the way you do." Preston chuckled. "I've been a part of the police force here for the last 20 years, 15 as chief. It's hard not to know everyone when the place is so small and there are no secrets." Hillary laughed. "I noticed that, about not having secrets around here. I guess there's not much excitement around here." Preston thought about his current case. It wasn't something he was too worried about, but it would classify as excitement for sure. He would not discuss it with Hillary. Gossip traveled so fast, it would only be a matter of time before it was all out in the open anyway. No sense in speeding it up even more. Hillary looked around the restaurant, and her eyes fell on a couple who seemed to be very uncomfortable. "Those two don't look like they're having a lot of fun," she said, pointing them out to Preston. "I would say they're fighting about something. Maybe they've been together for long enough to argue now, but they haven't been together long enough to be comfortable about their differences." Preston laughed. "That was fantastic, Hillary," he said. "That's Tanner and Marina. They've been together for 6 months, and I'm confident to say the butterflies and immediate attraction is just about over now." Hillary smiled, pleased with herself. Her deduction skills impressed Preston, but maybe it was a fluke. He tested it out. "What about her?" he asked, pointing to a 30-something lady reading alone in a booth. "Do you know her?" Hillary shook her head. There were only a few people at the restaurant she recognized. "I would say she needs some time away from the husband and kids, so she comes out alone just to take some time for herself. She's overworked and feels underappreciated, and she's willing to pay the price of a meal just to get some space." Preston laughed again. It was spectacular to listen to Hillary nail it on the head. 2 for 2 could still be luck, but he doubted it. "How do you read people so well?" Preston asked after he pointed to 2 more tables and she described them almost right each time. Hillary shrugged. "I've always had a knack for it, I guess. I practice it more now that I have customers coming in who assume I know what they want." It impressed Preston. "I should give you a job on the force," he said. Hillary shook her head, blushing. "You flatter me, Preston. But I'm more than happy where I am now." "Pity," Preston said. "If you worked at the station, I could see you more often, and that would brighten my day." "Preston," Hillary laughed. "You're a shameless flirt." Preston grinned, pleased with himself. He liked to think he was charming and funny. Years ago, one of his friends had told him that he could get any woman he wanted, and he'd taken that to heart. It was a compliment that Hillary was affected by his advances after she had made it clear she wanted to be just friends. "Tell me about your case," Hillary said, throwing Preston off track. "I thought this date was to get away from work and relax a little," Preston said. He was uncomfortable talking about cases with civilians. There were so many loose ends in the Reginald Danvers murder, and he didn't want mass hysteria to break loose if the inhabitants of Rosemary Harbor knew the police had any leads on the killer. "Please," Hillary pleaded. "I won't tell anyone, you have my word. It's just you asked about my baskets, and that makes me so nervous. This shop is all I have after my husband died, and I can't stand the thought that my baskets might have had something to do with the crime." It was hard to believe how a gift basket could have been a weapon in a murder. She turned it over in her mind all day and had come up with nothing, which was why she needed Preston to tell her what was going on. Preston took a deep breath, hesitating. Hillary looked worried, and he didn't want her to stress about it. Maybe if he told her enough to help her calm down, it would be all right. He hated seeing a woman in distress, especially if it was his fault. The murder and how it happened wasn't his fault. But he was doing his job, and in the process, he had caused Hillary some anxiety. "If you promise not to talk about it, I think I can give you something that might set you at ease," Preston said. Hillary nodded. She wanted to know that she wasn't somehow to blame for the death of a man whom everybody seemed to have loved. "I'm sure you've heard that Danvers was killed in an explosion." Hillary nodded. She had heard no specific details, but she'd heard something of the sort. It was the talk of the town and difficult to avoid. "Well, we believe something in the gift basket caused the explosion, judging by what the crime scene investigator had to say." "What?" Hillary frowned. "Something in one of my baskets exploded? How is that possible?" Her baskets contained incense, not gunpowder, for heaven's sake. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Nothing in the basket seems to be capable of setting off an explosion, but we have to follow up on it. The crime scene investigator insists that it was from the basket, and he's serious about his reputation." "This is crazy," Hillary said. "I agree with you. In fact, I tried setting off an explosion with some incense sticks. There was evidence they were in the basket, and even though I got a little flame going a long way with lighter fluid, nothing serious happened except a singed pinky finger." Hillary laughed, and the sound was beautiful. Preston smiled, happy to have brought her a little entertainment. "Oh, Preston, I bet it's your good sense of humor that got you through so many years of crime investigations. You're still such a happy man, and now I see why." Preston nodded. If he hadn't had such a cheerful outlook on life, no doubt his job would have gotten the better of him ages ago. Rosemary Harbor wasn't the kind of place where terrible crimes happen daily, but give any man enough bad news and he'd become at least a little depressed. "We always include incense in our baskets, but until recently we had artisan candles in there too," Hillary said. "Could it be that it was the candle?" Preston thought about it. He would have to consider it, but it seemed possible to him. Any lead was better than no lead. Then he realized what Hillary had said. "You said until recently?" "Why?" Preston asked. He was off duty, out on a date. He still considered it a date regardless of what Hillary said, and he had told himself he wouldn't think about work at all tonight. But now that Hillary had brought it up, his investigative nature was running wild again, and he smelled a clue. "We contracted with a candle maker named Lauren Peters to sell her candles through the shop, and it was an option in our baskets. But she stopped her business with us last week. She's leaving town." It piqued Preston's interest. "Thank you, Hillary," Preston said. He had a lead now that he hadn't had before, and that would help him. He would go to speak to Lauren the next day. He knew her well enough for the call to be a friendly one, and that was just what he needed. They changed topics, even though Preston now wished they could talk more about the case. It was better not to, though. He didn't want to stir up any trouble by telling Hillary too much, and anyway, he enjoyed her company more than he wanted to talk about work. They laughed and flirted the night away, and Preston felt that he was succeeding in his attempts to woo her. Chapter 3. Preston was good at his job. 20 years on the force had given him the ability to sniff out clues and follow them. He had a hunch about crime, and even though he lived in a small town, he liked to think that he had a big talent. And all that was deserting him right now. He hated it when things went wrong in a case, especially a case this big. Something special had just opened when Preston walked in. First come, first served, the parrot squawked, and Preston wondered how he knew to say that right at opening time. "Hello, Annabelle," Preston said to Hillary's daughter, who stood behind the counter with a book. "Morning, Chief," she said. "How can I help you?" "Another gift." Annabelle still wasn't happy about Preston taking her mother out the night before, and even though he was an officer of the law, someone she had to respect by default, she didn't want to give the man the time of day. The only man who deserved attention from Annabelle and Hillary, in her opinion, was her father. "No, thank you. I want to speak to Hillary, please." Preston was polite despite his mood. He could tell Annabelle didn't like him. He didn't know why she was hostile toward him, but the young folks in town were all so moody. Preston was sure he hadn't been like that when he was young. Respect for your elders was drilled into kids from the start back then. Discipline just wasn't what it used to be these days. "I'll go tell her," Annabelle said and disappeared into the back room. She would tell her mother. Eventually. First, she would make Chief Davis wait. There was no rush for him to see Hillary. Was a whole evening with her not enough? Preston waited as patiently as he could in the store. He checked his wristwatch. There was paperwork to take care of at the station, clues to follow up on. This was just a waste of time, but without all the pieces to this puzzle, he would never know what had happened. What was taking Hillary so long? When Preston turned around, he noticed the parrot's perch was empty. He looked around. Where did that bird go? It was usually so loud, and now it was quiet in the shop. Spot flew out of nowhere and squawked boo right in Preston's ear. Preston waved his hands and ducked away from the bird. "Spot!" Hillary yelled, finally coming out of the back room just in time to see Preston cower away from the parrot. "If you scare away my customers, I'll leave you alone at home all day." The parrot returned to his perch and hung his head. "I'm sorry. Forgive me, forgive me. I was born to be wild, but my cage was too small." Hillary shook her head, chuckling. "That parrot. I swear he goes looking for trouble sometimes. Are you all right?" Preston nodded. "I'm fine. He's got a smart mouth on him." Hillary nodded, and her smile lifted his dark mood a little. Hillary's auburn hair was pinned back in a half-up style today, and she wore a butter-yellow blouse that made her porcelain skin glow. She looked great, but then she always looked good. Hillary was one of those women who took care of herself in a way that made her beauty look effortless. "What's all this noise?" Rose asked, coming out of the back room after Hillary. "Oh, Chief, it's you. Back so soon?" She looked from Preston to Hillary, sure that the night must have been a success if he was here again. Preston sighed. He noticed Rose's glances and wasn't in the mood to be set up today. It had gone well last night, but right now he had other things on his mind. "It's business today, Rose," Preston said. He turned his attention to Hillary. "I can't find Lauren Peters at all. For that matter, I can't find Doris Tanner either. Neither of them are answering their phone." "Doris?" Hillary asked. "Isn't that the Danverses' housekeeper?" When Preston nodded, she thought for a moment. What do those two have in common? "I need to speak with them both, that's all." He didn't want to say what it was about. If it was just Hillary, that would be a different story, but Rose was there, ears wide open. Rose was like a town crier. When she knew, everyone knew. "I have a few things on my to-do list for the day, and thought I could tick them both off early, but now it looks like I was overeager." He tried not to sound as irritated as he felt. "Well, if you ask me," Rose chipped in, Doris is probably consoling herself with a poker tournament somewhere, hiding in the shadows of a ratty gambling ring. Reginald was always offering her advice about where to invest her money, so I guess she's won some. He knew everything about good and bad deals, bragged about how he dodged a bullet just before he died. Rose prattled on, telling everyone in the shop how Reginald was good at investing and how he knew about Doris's addiction. He wanted to help her, the poor man. Hillary rolled her eyes. She didn't enjoy gossip. She couldn't help hearing what the people around her spoke about, but she hated to hear someone speak ill of another. Okay, enough about Doris and her gambling, Hillary said, glaring at the older woman. They were getting very off topic. I can't help you with Doris, Chief, but I know where Lauren is. She moved into a friend's apartment. Her condo sold the day it went on the market, leaving her with no place to live. She didn't expect it to sell that fast. Wow, that hardly happens, Preston said. Do you know where the friend's apartment is? I'd like to talk to Lauren as soon as possible. I'm worried she will leave town before we question her, and I would be grateful if you could point me in the right direction. Why would Lauren want to leave town? Rose asked. You know she's leaving, Rose, Hillary said. I think Preston might just have a few questions for her. Isn't that right? Preston nodded. That's right. We are trying to get some leads, and there are a few people we can talk to. That's all. He appreciated that Hillary was helping him out, warding off Rose's nosy questions. Hillary was as curious as Rose, but she didn't feel the need to tell everyone. Rose was a wonderful woman to have as a friend and to help around the shop, and Hillary was grateful for everything she'd done at Something Special, but everyone had their flaws. Rose nodded, but she wasn't convinced that was all it was. She was determined to find out what was going on, if only to appease her curious nature, and she kept her eyes and ears open. In the meantime, Preston had come to Hillary for advice, and that was something to note. Perhaps her little setup with the dinner the night before had worked better than she'd thought. Hillary, why don't you take Preston to Humphrey's apartment? Rose suggested, still set on getting the two of them together. Annabelle was still in the back room and not around to stop the two from spending more time with each other. That would be very helpful, Preston said to Hillary. My time seems to be running out. Hillary agreed, and the two of them set off, leaving Rose and Annabelle to run the shop. Hurry back, Spot croaked as they left the shop. Hillary got into the police cruiser with Preston and directed him to Lauren's friend Humphrey's apartment. It was located in a complex on the edge of town in a neighborhood that needed a little love and restoration. There, Hillary said, pointing. Her car is that green Nova. Preston parked the car and they got out. Hillary led him into the apartment building and up to Humphrey's door. It was wide open. Preston knocked on the open door and stepped into the apartment. When Hillary waited outside, Preston nodded for her to follow him. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to be a part of the investigation, but she wanted to know what kind of questions Preston had for Lauren. She vowed she would keep out from underneath Preston's feet. Hello, he called. This is Police Chief Preston Davis. Miss Peters? Lauren came out of the bedroom, surprised. Oh, hello, Chief. And Hillary. She looked a little confused. What can I do for you? I want to ask you a few questions if you don't mind, Preston said. You came with Hillary to question me? It made little sense, Hillary was aware. Lauren gave a quick shake of her head, as if the thought didn't matter. Now isn't a good time for me. I'm busy, unfortunately. Preston stepped forward, peering into the part of the bedroom visible from where he stood. A suitcase was open and half packed on the bed. He headed toward the bedroom, and Lauren rushed ahead of him. Hillary stayed in the living room, watching the two. Lauren got to the suitcase first and pushed something down the side before spinning around. It didn't look like Preston noticed. Hillary wanted to know what it was. And why had Lauren run ahead to hide it from Preston? It had to be something she didn't want him to see. That made Hillary think that Preston needed to see it. Are you going somewhere, Miss Peters? Preston asked. I'm leaving soon, a job offer in Ohio. I thought it was common news around town. You know how people talk. Preston nodded. I know. But you'll be surprised how many secrets there are around here, too. I know you're busy, but I need to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. Lauren opened her mouth to protest, but Preston held up a hand to stop her, and she could hardly refuse a man of the law. He walked back out to the living room and Lauren sighed, joining Hillary. The three of them sat down, Lauren's back to the bedroom. Can I use your bathroom? Hillary asked just before Preston started. It was not her place to be involved, and she thought Lauren might say more in her absence. Down the hall to your left, Lauren said. Hillary thanked her and walked away, leaving the two to talk. She overheard Preston asking about Lauren's candles, how she made them and how her delivery systems worked. Hillary was only half listening. She didn't need to go to the bathroom. She wanted to know what Lauren was hiding. Hillary glanced over her shoulder, and when she was sure the two in the living room wouldn't see her, she walked into the bedroom and pushed her hand down the side of the suitcase. She retrieved a strip of photos, the kind from a photo booth, showing Reginald Danvers and Lauren. They were laughing together in the first photo, pulling funny faces in the second and third, and kissing in the fourth. Hillary wondered what to do. Lauren would be livid if she showed these photos to Preston. But she didn't see she had a choice. Preston said he was short on leads. This looked like a good lead to her. I'm sorry to interrupt, Hillary said, taking the photo strip to the living room. She handed it to Preston. What were you doing in my room? Lauren cried out. Surely that violates my privacy, she asked Preston. He held the photo strip in his hand, looking at the images. Did you and Mr. Danvers have an affair? He asked Lauren. Don't be ridiculous, she said. That was just. She had nothing she could say. There was no way to paint it differently than it was. A picture spoke 1,000 words, and there were 4. She let out a breath in a shudder. This was a different story. Preston hadn't known that Lauren Peters and Reginald Danvers had been involved. It changed everything about the case, and he needed to bump her up to priority. I'm sorry, Miss Peters. I have to ask you to come to the station with me for further questioning. What? Why? Lauren exclaimed. I did nothing wrong. You can't do this, why now? Because Reginald Danvers was murdered a few days ago, and if you were romantically involved, that makes you a suspect, especially since he was married. Lauren paled and Preston felt a little bad for being so blunt, but being nice about it wouldn't change the truth. They were groping in the dark right now with very little to go by, and any solid lead was like finding gold. I'm sorry, Hillary said to Lauren. She'd thought she was doing the right thing by showing Preston what Lauren had tried to hide. But she hadn't meant for Lauren to become a suspect in a murder case. Lauren sneered at Hillary. Sorry doesn't change that I'm being taken to the station. Hillary closed her eyes. Lauren was right. There was nothing she could do now. Shall I make my way back to the shop? Hillary asked Preston. He nodded, already heading for the door with Lauren. Thank you for your directions, Hillary, he said. Hillary walked back to something special. The weather was perfect, and the shop wasn't too far, but Hillary felt a little glum after getting Lauren in trouble. Still, if Preston hadn't known Lauren and Reginald had had an affair, Lauren might have left town without Preston knowing all the details. The more he knew, the easier it would be to solve the case, and that was the point. So it wasn't too bad, was it? Chapter 4. When Hillary returned to the shop, Annabelle stood behind the counter, looking sour. Did you have a good time? She asked. If you mean that showing a police officer the address of an apartment can be fun, then yes, thank you. Hillary knew why Annabelle was upset. The dinner the previous night had gone well, and she understood that Annabelle felt that Hillary was forgetting about Matthew, but being mad about her doing a civil duty was ridiculous. I'm placing the order for more baskets, Annabelle said. Hillary walked to the counter and leaned on it with her elbows. Listen. You know your father meant everything to me. If I could have it my way, he would never have gotten sick and we would still be with him, living our lives in Miami. Annabelle looked up at Hillary. She missed her life in Miami, the family they used to be. She hated that things had changed. But she knew that even if her father had still been alive, Annabelle would have moved out and created a life, and eventually a family of her own, and things would still have changed. I don't want the memory of him to be tainted, Annabelle said. And it won't be. No matter how many dates I go on or how many men I meet, your father will always be my first love, the man I spent almost 30 years of my life with. But I deserve another shot at being happy. I'm not in any hurry to fall in love again, but if it happens, it happens. Annabelle nodded. Deep down, she knew her mom deserved to be happy again. The last 5 years with Matthew had been rough on her. But it was hard to let go and move forward. It felt wrong to leave her father behind, like he hadn't been such a big part of their lives for as long as she could remember. Oh, you're back already, Rose said, coming out of the back room with a catalog. I was wondering what the two of you would get up to. Annabelle glared at Rose. The older woman was kind and generous toward them, and Annabelle was amused by her quirks, but sometimes she despised the woman for getting involved with everyone's business. How about you and I go out tonight? Rose asked Hillary. Tonight? Hillary asked. Yes, why not? It's tiring being cooped up every night. I want to go out for a glass of wine. Why don't you come with me? You've been so busy with the shop. Hillary thought about it. She knew what Rose was after. She wanted to know what had happened when Hillary had gone with Preston. She was dying of curiosity, and Hillary knew full well that the invitation to have a glass of wine wasn't just to let her wind down after a hard day at the shop. Why don't you join us? Rose asked Annabelle. We'll make a girls' night of it. Annabelle smiled and shook her head. I don't like wine, Rose. Thank you. You two go ahead, enjoy yourselves. Rose smiled. She'd invited Annabelle to be polite. Annabelle was much younger than Rose and Hillary, and spending time with them outside of work just wouldn't be her cup of tea or glass of wine, and it relieved Rose that she declined. She wanted to know what was going on between Hillary and Preston. It was strange that Preston asked Hillary's advice when he couldn't find Lauren. She knew she bordered on being a meddling old woman, but she couldn't help herself. Wine's Up was the local bar in town, and everyone went there if they wanted to let loose a little. It was busy for a Tuesday night, but the bar had started a drink special on Tuesdays, and no one in Rosemary Harbor said no to a discount. The bar was decorated with rich brown furniture and dim lighting around the walls, with music floating from invisible speakers. A flat-screen television hung on the far wall for sports fans, and 2 pinball tables and an old-school jukebox lined the other. It was a strange combination of retro and modern, and everyone loved it. Rose and Hillary walked to the bar and sat down. They each ordered a glass of rosé. Hillary looked around. She knew many of the people around town by now, and recognized a few of the other patrons at the bar. Jessica Danvers and Doris Tanner sat at the far end of the bar, both drinking wine, and judging by the red stains on their lips, they were well past one glass. Hillary wondered if she should call Preston and tell him she found Doris, but after the fiasco with Lauren, she decided not to, at least not yet. Mr. Fitzgerald sat with a friend that Hillary didn't recognize close to the jukebox, and 3 college-age kids hovered around one of the pinball machines, whooping whenever one of them scored. A few more customers sat at the tables in the seating area, and Hillary recognized at least half. She knew they all knew who she was. Every small-town resident always knew the newbies in town. Hillary waited for Rose to fish for information. The more she thought about the case, the more curious she was too. She wanted to know Rose's side of the gossip. Tell me about your visit today, Rose said. Did you find Lauren? Hillary nodded. We did. Preston wanted to ask her some questions. Did you know that Lauren was involved with Reginald? She said the latter a little softer, nervous that Jessica would hear. The music was too loud for Hillary's voice to carry, and it wasn't like Jessica Danvers herself had been faithful. Hillary knew, thanks to Rose, that Jessica had done her fair share of cheating. I knew, Rose said. Although few people did. It's one of those little things I kept to myself. Hillary doubted Rose could keep anything to herself. If she didn't say something first, Rose wouldn't hesitate when she was asked. They glanced at Jessica and Doris, who both looked morose, sipping their alcohol. They were grieving together. Reggie and Jess were always messing around behind each other's backs. I would have been surprised if Lauren and Reggie didn't have something going. He couldn't keep his hands off any woman that was willing. There are at least 6 people in this bar that the 2 of them have conquered. Hillary shifted on her stool. She didn't like gossiping, but it seemed even worse to talk like this about the deceased. She felt for Jessica. Hillary had lost a husband, and even though she and Matthew had been always faithful to each other, her heart went out to the woman. I have to admit, the affair had to be a serious one, or I doubt Lauren would have stayed here. She has staying power, that's for sure. I wouldn't have stuck around this place, no matter who I was in love with. Hillary shook her head, sipping her wine. She didn't doubt that Rose would have left if it came down to it. She was independent and only put down roots because she wanted to, not because someone asked. Do you think that's why she stayed? Hillary asked. Maybe she liked it here. Rose shook her head. She gave up every career opportunity that came her way, they say. I don't know for sure. How many opportunities can one woman get? For making candles? Hillary shrugged. She kept quiet, letting Rose do all the talking. It didn't take much to encourage Rose to keep going. I always felt for the poor woman that she gave up so many great opportunities to stick around a town that didn't offer much for her career. It's a great place, as you know, but it's not the kind of place you stay in if you want to go places. I guess love is a strange thing. I wonder if he led her on, told her he was leaving Jessica. We probably will never know. Rose took a sip of her wine. The glass was still almost full because she didn't stop talking. Anyway, I'm glad she accepted that job in Ohio. Everyone deserves a good opportunity. Hillary nodded. It was good that Lauren had made something of herself. The timing just seemed to be strange. And if Preston's reaction had been a sign, asking her to go to the station with him, the timing was very strange. Hillary glanced at the 2 women at the end of the bar again. They looked bereaved. The poor women, both losing a man so dear to them. Doris had been the Danvers' housekeeper for years, as far as Hillary knew. No matter what your station of service was, you grew attached to people in that time. Oh, look at them, Rose said, also looking toward Jessica and Doris. It must be so hard to deal with this, especially considering that the case is yet unsolved and no one knows who did it. Couldn't it have been an accident? Hillary asked. What if the explosion was because of a malfunction and not on purpose? Rose shrugged. I wouldn't know about these things. In my day, explosions were left up to the men. They both watched the women. Jessica looked up and nodded to Rose, who nodded back. I guess you know Jessica well? Hillary asked. She was feeling the wine, and it made her tongue looser. Usually she kept to herself, but Rose was in the habit of gossiping, and it was so easy to fall into step with her. Hillary's curiosity was increasing by the moment. Alcohol had a funny way of making people bolder, to let them break their own rules. Hillary was getting more and more eager to learn of any news Rose had. Oh, I was the one that hand-delivered the basket to Doris that night, remember? I stepped inside to chat with her for a few minutes, and when I left, before I was even off the porch, I overheard Doris inside encouraging Reggie to set it all up for Jessica as a surprise before she got home. The 2 of them were trying to make things right between them. Can you believe it? Doris suggested that Reggie light the candle just before Jessica walked through the door so that it set the mood. She told Reginald to light the candle? Hilary asked. Rose nodded. She insisted. She kept saying how important it was to create the atmosphere, and that the basket just like that wouldn't do it. He had to light it, she said. Hilary pulled her face. Their baskets were romantic enough, thank you very much. Rose sighed. Romance dies, so work hard to keep it alive. Those two have been betraying each other from the start, but I was under no illusions. I knew they loved each other. It's why this whole thing is so tragic, that he would die just before they made it right again. Fate can be so twisted. It can be, Hilary agreed, and she thought of Matthew again, of how she'd blamed fate and all that went with it for taking her husband away too soon. Everything had gone so well for them for so long, it was unfair that something had taken him from her. It was a strange comfort to know that she wasn't the only woman whose love had been ripped away from her. It wasn't the same thing. Matthew had died of cancer, and Hilary had had time to prepare herself and say goodbye before Matthew had passed away. Jessica never had that chance, and the sorrow in that would be more than anyone could bear. Rose and Hilary drank their wine in silence for a while. Rose was rarely silent, but it wasn't out of place to honor the dead, and she sympathized with Jessica. She had lost 2 husbands herself, and the pain of losing someone you had vowed to spend the rest of your life with hurt. No matter what those 2 had done to each other, Reggie hadn't deserved to die like that. No one did. Hilary's mind was on the baskets. They were supposed to bring love and happiness to couples. They were created for that purpose. It was ironic that something as cheerful as a surprise date night basket would bring the death of a man who was so well loved. When Jessica had ordered it from the shop, she had been so excited. Hilary frowned. Jessica, not Reginald, had ordered the basket. She had known about it then. It wouldn't have been a surprise. She had even chosen the contents from their list, discussing with Hilary what Reginald might like. When she reminded Rose of that, Rose shrugged. Oh, if you ask me, the whole thing was planned. Hilary gasped. You can't mean? Oh, no. No, of course not. Rose laughed at herself. I don't mean that someone planned the explosion. I mean the reason Doris suggested that Reginald surprise Jess on the night I delivered the basket. I think Doris wanted them occupied so that she could slip out of the house. You see, Rose leaned in closer and lowered her voice, she's had a problem and she needed to sneak away. A problem? Hilary asked, glancing at Doris. Judging by how the woman hung on the bar, affected by the alcohol, she doubted Doris had a drinking problem. Someone who had a drinking problem could handle much more than she obviously could. Rose lowered her voice even more so the women wouldn't overhear them by chance. Doris has a gambling addiction. She plays online poker as far as I know, but she also can't walk past a game without joining in. Hilary remembered Rose's snide comment about Doris gambling in a ratty back alley, or something of the sort. I think she needed to get out to feed her addiction, and what better way to slip out unnoticed than to have the Danvers occupied with each other. That's why I think she was so encouraging that night, why she insisted. I think she was in a rush to get away. Hilary nodded and finished the last bit of wine in her glass. It made more sense now that Rose painted it that way. And she'd heard something about Doris and a gambling addiction before, although she tried not to pay too much attention to gossip if she could help it. It was getting harder and harder as everyone had something to say and there was so much happening around this little town. How about another glass of wine? Rose asked when she finished her glass. Hilary thought about it for a minute. She rarely drank, but she was having a good time and there was no reason not to have another glass with Rose. When she agreed, Rose ordered another 2 glasses. When the drinks arrived, Hilary gazed at the pinkish-red liquid. I'm not a big wine drinker, but I think I can get used to this, she said. Rose smiled and took a sip. It's such a nice thing to do together. Drinking coffee together is going out of fashion. The 2 women laughed. So on to other things. Tell me about your night with Preston, Rose said. Hilary blushed. She didn't like talking about herself. She liked it even less than talking about others. It was all right, thank you, she said. We talked about this and that. He's a good friend to the town, isn't he? Rose nodded, waiting for more. When Hillary didn't offer more, she prodded a bit. And? Do you think you'll go out with him again? Hillary shrugged. I don't know. I must see if it comes to that. I think he's busy now with the case and all. Rose nodded. Again, Hillary wasn't offering information. For someone as curious as Rose, it was torture. Maybe Hillary and Preston weren't a good match. Had she read their body language wrong when he'd come into the shop to buy a gift the day before? She didn't think so. Rose took pride in her ability to set people up, to know if they were compatible or not. It was probably because of Preston. The man was impossible to set up with anyone. Rose had tried for years to change him from Rosemary Harbor's most eligible bachelor into a married man. But something already took the man she knew. Preston was married to his work. And what a fine couple they made. He was good at his job, keeping the crime in the area to a minimum and taking care of business when it happened. She couldn't blame him for building his career, but it was sad to see a man alone. Rose was a firm believer in love and being together. She looked at Hillary, who was sipping her wine and watching the surrounding people. She deserved to be happy too. With someone like Annabelle in her life to stop her from having any fun at all, Hillary wouldn't find a husband again. Maybe Rose could nudge along the relationship between Hillary and Preston. She wasn't wrong about Preston's attitude toward Hillary, she was sure. Rose believed she had a knack for matchmaking, and seeing people she brought together happy and well made her feel fulfilled. What else was there left to do for an old woman in a sleepy town with no husband of her own? Chapter 5. When Hillary woke up, she had Preston on her mind. Her head ached a little after the wine last night. She should have stopped after one glass, but the alcohol had set her thinking the night before and she was still in that motion. The morning sun shed some light on her emotions about Preston, and she took the time to think about what she was feeling. She liked Preston, that she was sure of. She didn't know how ready she was to fall into another romance. It had been several years since Matthew had died, but maybe Annabelle was right. Maybe she shouldn't date yet. She would be lucky to have a friend like Preston. He was a good guy with the town's best interests at heart, and his job was taking care of people and making sure they were safe. It was noble as could be, and he was good company too. Hillary wanted to see Preston again. Yes, she enjoyed his company, but she also wanted to know what was going on with the case, if they'd discovered anything more from Lauren now that they had a bigger picture. She was proud of herself for what she'd found out for him, even though she'd felt bad about the repercussion. She didn't want to give Preston the wrong idea since he seemed gung-ho on beginning a romantic involvement, so she staged a run-in. Thanks to her own routine and the town's inability to keep any secrets, Hillary knew that Preston visited Corner Coffee every morning at 10 to get coffee for himself. Someone from the station always picked up the morning run, but Preston collected his own coffee after that. Hillary felt he did that because he liked to keep visible in the community. After Hillary opened something special and unpacked stock with Annabelle and Rose, she got ready to leave for the cafe. "Where are you going, Mom?" Annabelle asked when Hillary took her handbag from underneath the counter. "I'm going to get a cup of coffee at Corner Coffee. You'll be okay running the shop?" Annabelle nodded. "I'll be fine. You're going alone?" "Yes, I'll be back later, sweetheart." "Bring me a coffee, will ya?" Spot said at the door. Hillary laughed. "Sure thing," she replied, reaching into her bag to toss him an unsalted almond before heading out. She hurried to Corner Coffee. She hadn't lied to Annabelle, she was going to the cafe alone. She would not be alone once she got there, but Annabelle didn't need to know that. Besides, it wasn't for romance anyway, so no point in making her daughter upset over nothing. Corner Coffee was a warm little coffee place with light wooden floors and pale green wallpaper. Large windows stretched all the way around, making the place bright and cheerful. "Morning, Hillary? Table for one?" Sue Ann asked at the door when Hillary arrived. Hillary nodded and followed the waitress to a table by a window. She liked this place because she could order at the table and not wait in line at the counter. Hillary sat down and ordered a latte. When Sue Ann left, Hillary glanced at her watch. It was almost 10. Preston would arrive soon. Her latte arrived and she sipped it, looking out the window. The coffee shop looked over the bay, and today the ocean was a teal blue, with hardly any clouds in the sky. The ocean had moods, Hillary thought. Sometimes it was gray and stormy, as if it were angry. Sometimes it was a dark blue and so calm it looked almost like a lake. As if it were sad. It looked calm and peaceful today, Hillary decided. Just like her. "Good morning, Chief," Hillary heard Sue Ann say at the door, and a moment later, Preston walked in. He looked upright and important in a fresh uniform, like he meant business. He got in line at the counter and saw someone waving at him from across the seating area. His eyes fell on Hillary and he smiled at her, surprised. He turned to Sue Ann. "Would you mind bringing me my usual over there? I will join Hillary." "Sure," Sue Ann said. Preston walked to Hillary. "Mind if I sit down?" he asked. "Please," Hillary said. Preston looked at Hillary. She looked wonderful in a white blouse with red flowers on it. He was glad he'd run into her. He had been hoping he could spend some time with her again after dinner the other night. "How is your case coming along?" Hillary asked. "It's going okay. We still don't have enough information, but it will come. These things have a way of showing themselves. It's not a matter of if, but when." Hillary smiled. "That's a great way to look at it. I bet that's why you're so good at what you do." Preston smiled, feeling good about himself. She wanted him to sit with her, and she was complimenting him. This was a good start to his day, if ever he had one. "I wanted to talk to you about the case. I'm glad you came in." The warmth died down a little. "I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed being a part of the investigation yesterday. I'm not a professional or anything, but I like being able to add to the case if I can. It's always good to have a few extra eyes around town, don't you think?" "I guess so." Preston started. He realized what this was all about. Hillary hadn't flagged him down to spend time with him because she enjoyed his company. This was about the case. He hadn't realized that taking her with him would go to her head so much. "I'm not sure if you should get involved, though. We're investigating a murder. It's serious and could even be dangerous." Hillary nodded. "Which is why you need all the help you can get. You said yourself you didn't have much to go by just yet, and I'm sure I can add to your list of clues, if nothing else." Preston didn't know how to respond. Hillary was eager. He had commented on her keen eye at the dinner the other night, and he'd turned to her for the address where Lauren Peters was staying, but he'd had no idea that he would create an amateur private eye in doing so. Preston liked to follow protocol with his cases. Doing things by the book had gotten him this far in his career, and he didn't like breaking the rules. Rules were there to help, and they had guided him his whole life. Besides, he didn't want a part-time partner, a sidekick. He wanted a date. "I don't know if this is a good idea," Preston said again. He couldn't bring himself to be blunt and tell her no just like that. "Oh, it's no problem. I have information for you, in fact." Preston hadn't expected that. "Oh," he asked. "I was with Rose at Wines Up last night when I realized Jessica Danvers was in my shop 2 weeks ago to order a basket for her and Reginald." She waited for Preston to put 2 and 2 together. When he said nothing, she continued. "She was the one who ordered the basket, but according to what Rose overheard at their house the night she delivered the basket, Reginald was the one who set it up as a surprise for her. Doesn't that sound strange to you? Why would it be a surprise if Jessica was the one to order it, and why was Reginald the one who prepared it? It makes little sense. So, I thought, I can't decide if ordering the basket makes Jessica innocent because it was all behind her back, or if she knew and she was an accomplice. Because if word had gotten out that Lauren and Reginald. Preston shook his head. Let me stop you, Hillary, he said. Hillary stopped talking and looked at Preston, waiting with excitement for him to speak. Preston had to admit her bright eyes and flushed cheeks made her even more beautiful. Lauren isn't a person of interest anymore. Hillary frowned. What? Why not? Preston sighed. We questioned her. It is obvious she doesn't have the know-how to make any kind of explosive herself, let alone one that will go off at the right time to kill a specific person. And even if she did, she has an alibi for the night in question. Someone got inside the Danvers house and replaced the candle that was in there with an explosive candle. Lauren wasn't anywhere near their house that night. Hillary shook her head. She had been sure they were onto something when she'd discovered Lauren's affair with Reginald, when she became a suspect. So now what? Hillary asked. She felt a little deflated. When she'd remembered that it had been Jessica who ordered the basket, she'd been excited about the new information she could add to the case. So there was no way Lauren could have switched it out? She asked, just to confirm. Preston shook his head. You said yourself she sent the candles to you through the post so that it could go on her records. The moment the candles were done, they were packaged and then mailed. It had to happen after someone purchased the basket, or else how would the killer know which candle would go to the Danvers' house? Preston didn't tell Hillary that for a short while the police had looked into the possibility that one of the women at the shop could have been involved, but that had been ruled out. Rose was a pillar of the community and had no beef with either of the Danverses. And Hillary and Annabelle were too new in town to have made such an enemy that they'd commit murder. He'd had background checks done, just in case, and it had flagged nothing. What is Jessica Danvers's alibi? Hillary asked. It gripped her. She was smack in the middle of a murder mystery, and it was just like a novel she'd read. Except this was real life, and she was a part of it. Preston looked at Hillary, unsure how to answer. He didn't have a straight answer for her because, well, they didn't know yet. Jessica was vague about where she was, and that put her at the top of his suspect list. Every time they went to talk to the woman, she was so distraught they couldn't get much out of her. The police are still working on that. You have nothing at all? Hillary asked. Preston hesitated. Nothing I'm at liberty to discuss. But let's talk about other things. We should get together again sometime. Hillary wasn't sure how to answer. She knew she liked Preston, but she wasn't ready to go out with him again so soon. She glanced at her wristwatch. Oh no, I've been away from the shop for way too long. I have to go, Preston. I'm sorry to run out on you like this. She got up and fished in her bag for money for her latte. She put it on the table as she said, I'll let you know if I find out anything more. In the meantime, good luck with the investigation. She walked away from Preston before he could say anything but goodbye to her. She had gotten out of the date question, and she wanted to get away from him before he suggested anything else. Preston watched Hillary leave and scratched his head. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he felt like he'd missed something. Hillary had been very interested in the case, excited and alive when she spoke to him about it, and he was sure she liked him, judging by how she responded to him. As soon as he'd changed the subject, she ran away. Maybe she needed to hurry back to the shop. They had been talking for quite some time, but Preston suspected there was more to it than that. He had never understood women. It was one reason he was still single. Women made no sense to him at all, and he always thought he read one thing when they meant something else. His work was easier. It was ironic, but he could deal with criminals and false leads and missing alibis much better than he could handle any woman. And after something like Reginald's death, it made him even more unsure. Women were a mystery Preston knew he could never solve. Chapter 6. Rosemary Harbor had something of everything. It had tried to be a tourist location, but there hadn't been a great rush of tourists since the start. After that, they'd opted to be a retirement town, but too many families with younger kids had moved in. They had a place that catered to the young and old, for those who were bored and those who pursued a career, and Rosemary Harbor was now home to a tight community. One of the initial tourist attractions was a scenic walking route through botanical gardens with indigenous plant life. It was peaceful and curved around the bottom part of town with hills and benches that catered to both those who wanted a workout and those who wanted to sit and enjoy the view. Twice a week, Hillary and Annabelle walked or jogged the route, depending on the week they'd had. "So, when are you going to see Preston again?" Annabelle asked. The two women scurried up a hill, pushing themselves. "I don't know. I don't get the feeling he's excited about me wanting to get involved with this case." Hillary had filled Annabelle in on what she'd been thinking after she'd gone to see Preston at the coffee shop. Annabelle had only listened, but Hillary knew that her daughter had put everything away to refer to later. Hillary had also told her what Preston had said about Lauren. He was so vague about Jessica's alibi, too. "I told you, I think something's up." "I meant, when are you going to see Preston for a date?" Annabelle pushed. She knew her mom had developed a little obsession about the case, but she was on a different track, and she didn't want the topic to change. Annabelle glanced at her mother, waiting for her to respond. Hillary hadn't told her anything about her dinner with Preston the other night. Annabelle suspected it was because of how she had reacted to the whole date thing. Maybe she had overreacted a little, but her father's death would be a touchy subject for a long time, and she felt that Hillary dating someone new was like forgetting all about him. "Maybe you should take it slow with him, Mom," Annabelle said. If her mother insisted on dating, she should at least keep it casual. Hillary glanced at Annabelle. "I don't want to date him. At least not now." Annabelle's steps faltered as she looked at Hillary. "Are you serious?" she asked. Hillary nodded. "I like the guy, sure. If things were different, maybe I would consider it. But I don't think I'm ready for a relationship." They carried on, keeping up the pace. Annabelle didn't want to look overjoyed that Hillary wasn't going after Preston, but it relieved her. "I think this is good," she said. Hillary smiled. She knew Annabelle was happy that she wasn't thinking about dating right now. She understood her daughter, even though they didn't always see eye to eye. "What I mean," Annabelle added, "is that it's natural to know that you're not ready yet and to wait." "Thanks, sweetheart," Hillary said. "Maybe it's a good idea not to mess with the perfection of your first marriage, you know? You were lucky to have it so good with Daddy." The conversation had gone well until Annabelle said that. Hillary's back was up the moment she said it. Hillary stopped walking, and Annabelle paused beside her. "Sweetheart, I know you're worried about me and I appreciate it. But I am capable of—" She stopped mid-sentence, spotting someone ahead of them. "What?" Annabelle asked. "You're capable of what?" Hillary shook her head, lifting her hand. "That's Jessica," she said. Annabelle glanced in the direction Hillary was looking and nodded, confirming. "It looks like it," she said. "She's probably out for a walk just like we are." With her focus on her phone, Jessica's eyes were glued to her screen. "Some workout. Come on." Hillary started walking again, heading down the road at a stiff pace to catch up with Jessica. Annabelle tried to get her to tell her what she was doing, but Hillary just shook her head. She marched ahead, gaining on Jessica. Hillary was curious about Jessica. Since the conversation with Preston on Monday night about the gift basket exploding, she had been turning it over and over in her mind. The basket had come from her store, and it worried her that she had somehow assisted in the murder. She didn't know at which point the basket had turned deadly, and it ate at her. What if it had been before it left the shop? What if she was responsible for the death of a man she hardly knew? A woman had lost her husband. Hillary couldn't bear the thought that she might have helped something so terrible along. What if she could have done more to stop it from happening? Although, who would have guessed that checking for explosives was the responsibility of a gift basket shop owner? Hillary was very close to Jessica now, and she looked ahead, marching past Jessica. She bumped against her in passing, but it was enough to knock Jessica's phone off her hands. Jessica stumbled. "Oh goodness, I'm so sorry," Hillary cried, grabbing onto Jessica to stabilize her before she fell. Annabelle reached for the phone and picked it up, glancing at the screen. "Are you all right?" "I was so deep in thought and didn't notice I was so close to you," Hillary said. Jessica nodded. "I'm okay," she said. Her blonde hair was perfect, no gray at the roots, as if the dye job was fresh, not a hair out of place. She wore expensive workout clothes, as if she trained every day, but the outfit looked brand new. Her face had a haunted look to it, out of place against the rest of her body, which had a rich sheen to it. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she looked like she'd aged overnight. It was something Hillary could talk to her about. She wouldn't be rude, losing someone was painful, but maybe Jessica would say something that was useful if Hillary pushed the topic. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Hillary said, and she meant it. "Thank you," Jessica said, and the answer was automatic and empty, as if she'd said it 1,000,000 times. "You probably get told that a lot." That's what I struggled with the most, not knowing what to say when people were direct, or handling people that had no idea what to say. Jessica blinked at Hillary. Hillary knew that Jessica wanted peace and quiet, that she didn't want to handle people who wanted to say how sorry they were when they had no idea what it was like. The hardest part for Hillary had been to put on a smile after Matthew died, when she'd felt like she would cry forever. The last thing Jessica would want, she guessed, was to talk about it. And if it were any other situation, Hillary would have respected the woman and given her that. But she was curious about Jessica's alibi. Hillary wanted to know if she herself had somehow helped the murder along. She wanted to know the facts. "Have you lost someone?" Jessica asked. Hillary nodded. "My husband died a few years ago. I know the pain of losing the man you built your world around." Jessica looked like she would cry. For a recent widow, she held it together very well. It's nice to talk to someone who understands what it's like. So many people tell me they know what I'm going through, but how can they? How can they know what it's like to go home after a hard day and find your husband dead on the floor? Hillary put her hand on Jessica's shoulder. She felt bad for probing, for trying to find information when this was so hard on Jessica. Her life would never be the same, and she hadn't had time to prepare herself to be strong for when it had happened. "Grief is hard," Hillary said. "And it's lonely. I'm so sorry that you have to go through this." "Having the police involved doesn't make it any easier," Jessica said. "I can't just lay it to rest, forget about the whole thing, and try to keep my head above water. They keep bringing the whole thing up, again and again." She pressed her fingers to her mouth and swallowed hard. Hillary leaned forward and hugged her. Jessica hesitated a moment before hugging Hillary back, and the two women stood together in the middle of the walkway, holding on to the grief that anchored them both. Hillary let go, and Jessica stepped back, collected and emotionless again. It was an art to do that. It came with being hurt often enough and not being able to show it, Hillary knew. Annabelle handed Jessica her phone. "Thank you," Jessica said, looking at Annabelle as if she'd forgotten she was there. She turned the phone around in her hands to check for damage. "I drop this stupid thing all the time." Annabelle didn't know what to say. She'd seen the screen, had a moment to look at it while Hillary spoke to Jessica. The screen was scratched. Apparently she dropped it a lot, but that wasn't the only thing Annabelle noticed. She folded her arms around herself and paid attention to the conversation. "I feel horrible that something may have been planted in the gift basket," Hillary said. Jessica frowned and looked at Hillary and then at Annabelle. "What do you mean?" she asked. Hillary glanced at Annabelle too. Jessica didn't seem to know what she was talking about. Maybe it was because of the grief. when the world felt like it was falling apart, nothing made sense. But with the pending investigation, surely Jessica knew the details of the case. Unless Preston hadn't told her. It was strange to think that Preston would withhold something like this from Jessica, Reginald's wife. "Maybe I have it wrong," Hillary said. "There are so many stories doing the rounds." Jessica sighed. "Yes, I think that's just as bad as everyone asking me if I'm okay. Everyone has some version of what happened, and I don't know what to believe anymore. Sometimes I think they're all talking nonsense. Sometimes I'm scared every version is true." Hillary nodded. When Matthew had died, they'd lived in Miami. In a big city, there was so much going on. A death wasn't as talked about as in a place like Rosemary Harbor. There was also nothing to speculate about with her husband's death, whereas Reginald's death could very well be murder. Hillary could imagine how much harder it was for Jessica to mourn the loss of her loved one, with everyone in her business all the time. "If I can give you any advice," Hillary said, "it's to only focus on today. I know it's not the same as when my husband died, and it's much easier said than done, but what got me through was compartmentalizing. The only thing you need to worry about, from the moment you open your eyes, is the next step. And then the next after that, and the next, until you go to bed. That's the only way you will get through this. Handle only what comes across your path on any day, and leave the rest for another day." It had gotten her through Matthew's death, and even though Hillary's sympathy was to get more answers, she felt like it was her duty to help Jessica somehow, even if it was just with something as small as this. Something Special was her shop, dedicated to making people happy. Who would Hillary be if she didn't do it in person as well? "Thank you, Hillary," Jessica said after she finished. "You can't imagine how good it is to know that I'm not alone." Hillary nodded. "I'll let you get back to your workouts," Jessica said. "I think I'm over walking today." She said goodbye to both Hillary and Annabelle before she turned around and walked away from them. Annabelle turned to Hillary when they were a safe distance away from Jessica to not be overheard. "That was nice of you, Mom," she said. Hillary sighed. "When I see women who struggle like this, I'm reminded of what it was like just after your dad died. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Annabelle nodded. They'd come a very long way. When Matthew had been diagnosed with cancer, she'd felt like her world was ending, and she was sure her mother had felt the same. Somehow, they'd gotten through the chemo, the deterioration, the goodbyes, the death. They had picked themselves up and started a new life. Jessica still had a long road ahead of her. Annabelle knew that Hillary had spoken to Jessica intending to find out something about the murder. It was all she spoke about when the two of them were alone. Hillary would never discuss it all in front of Rose, of course. That would be just like posting it on the evening news. But Hillary and Annabelle had both lived their lives in a place where they had learned how to keep secrets. So even though she realized her mother's true intentions with the conversation, Annabelle also knew that Hillary felt sympathy for Jessica, and that's why she was so sweet to her. Owning something special was right up Hillary's alley, Annabelle thought. "I may have been nice, but we didn't find out anything worth knowing," Hillary said with a sigh. "I was hoping Jessica would mention something, anything, that would help us figure out what's going on. I guess I'm not cut out for this sleuthing." Annabelle shook her head. "Sometimes it's not about what's being said," she said. "What are you talking about?" Annabelle shrugged. "I picked up her phone. While you two were talking, I looked at the screen to make sure it wasn't cracked, and the calendar app popped open. You know, the way yours does too?" Hillary nodded. "It's frustrating. Well, it's also lucky this time. Jessica's alibi is in the calendar." Hillary stopped and stared at Annabelle. "You know her alibi?" she asked. Annabelle smiled, looking pleased with herself. While Reginald was meeting his premature demise through death by date night, Jessica was at a lawyer's office. Hillary swelled with excitement. "That's something," she said. "It is," Annabelle answered. "And you figured it out. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Annabelle rolled her eyes at her mother, but she was pleased with what she found out. She was happy Hillary was putting her energy into mystery solving rather than dating, and doing this together was almost a bonding experience. It was good to see her mom this alive again. It had been a while. Chapter 7. Hillary was finding out more and more information, and even though she'd never been much of a gossip, at least not until she moved to Rosemary Harbor, it was getting harder and harder to keep to herself. She had to know who had killed Reginald. The more she found out, the more she realized it hadn't been an accident, it had been cold-blooded murder. Reginald Danvers had done something, knowingly or unknowingly, to make someone angry, and he had paid for it with his life. Hillary tried to put the pieces together. At first, she'd thought it was Lauren. It had been her candle, and she'd had an affair with Reginald. It was a good enough reason for her to want to off him if she discovered Reginald and Jessica were trying to make their marriage work. And then there had been the part where Lauren had tried to skip town after she'd turned down so many opportunities before. But she had an alibi, and Lauren had turned up as a dead end. The more Hillary found out, the more curious she got. Who would have wanted Reginald dead? He'd had a string of lovers on the side, so it might have been Jessica herself. But why would she have arranged a date night? Unless it was to kill him. And then there was that Reginald was the one who had set up the gift basket, which made little sense at all. It didn't fit into the picture. In the shop, she talked to Annabelle about it. "I can't figure it out," she said. "Jessica doesn't seem like she could have done something like this. She's mourning and it looks real to me." "How do you know it's real?" Annabelle asked. "What if she's playing a part? What if she wanted him dead?" Hillary shook her head. It made little sense, none of it did. "I wish I knew what she was at the lawyer's for," Hillary said. "I looked it up," Annabelle said. "It's the offices of Newmark and Lewis, and they handle divorce. They do other things too, but I doubt Jessica was there for advice on property law." Annabelle had done a little digging of her own. It made little sense to her that Jessica would keep quiet about visiting a lawyer unless it had been something that would look bad. And it looked bad all right. Why would a woman want to divorce her husband if she was in love with him the way she'd led Annabelle and Hillary to believe? Then again, why would she file for divorce if she'd planned on killing him? It made little sense. "I know Mr. Lewis," Rose said, coming into the shop. She'd overheard the entire conversation, even though Hillary and Annabelle had been trying to whisper. Rose missed nothing, remembered everything, and wasn't shy to tell people what was on her mind. "If you ask me," she added, "that fight they had the night before doesn't look good either." Hillary and Annabelle both frowned at Rose. "What fight?" Hillary asked. "Oh," Rose said, shrugging even though she felt smug that she knew something the others didn't yet. "Mr. Sheffield lives right next door to the Danvers. He was the one who heard Jessica screaming the night Reggie was killed and called the police." "He heard her screaming but didn't hear the explosion?" Annabelle asked. "He came home only a few minutes before Jessica did," Rose said. "He was chasing the Danvers' dog. I guess Doris had left the gate open and it ran out. It happens all the time, Doris should have known to close it. Mr. Sheffield complains about their dog all the time, how it's always getting out and—" "Rose, what about the fight?" "Oh. Well, he also reported that the two of them had a huge fight the night before, a screaming match. He heard them mention divorce and spite." "Divorce," Hillary said. She couldn't imagine wanting to walk away from the man you promised to love for the rest of your life. Then again, she also couldn't imagine being unfaithful. She couldn't picture doing something like that to someone she loved. If it's a divorce lawyer, it means Jessica was ready to throw in the towel. But she must have had a specific reason to do it now. Maybe this lawyer will know something or have something on file, Hillary speculated. Annabelle and Rose both nodded. The three of them were in cahoots now, working together to find answers. Hillary felt like they were a little trio, partners in solving a crime. She didn't think Preston would be thrilled with her if he knew, but what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. "Why don't you take gift baskets to the lawyer's office?" Rose suggested. "Sometimes Newmark and Lewis get gifts to thank them for their service." Hillary looked at Rose. "It will only seem right that the owner of something special would deliver them," Annabelle added, catching on to what Rose was suggesting. If Hillary took the baskets to the offices, perhaps she could get in there and look around. "It's a pity Mr. Lewis is out of the office this afternoon." Rose smiled at the two women. She loved being a part of this, handing out the information she was so good at getting. Hillary knew what her daughter and her friend were suggesting. If she could get in there and find something that would count as evidence, she could prove that Jessica was behind all of this. And taking gift baskets was the perfect idea. "How long will Mr. Lewis be out for?" Hillary asked. Rose shrugged. "I don't know. He meets his wife for lunch, but sometimes they spend the afternoon together, and he doesn't come back to the office until the next day." She looked at the clock on the wall. "I would say you have at least 2 hours to deliver those baskets." "I'll get them ready," Annabelle offered and hurried to the back room. At first, being a part of this little investigation had been to keep an eye on her mom, to keep Hillary busy. As more information came up, Annabelle became engrossed, and now she was just as curious as the other two about who could have killed Reginald Danvers. She hadn't known the man, but she hoped that whoever did it was rightfully punished. When the baskets were ready, Hillary prepared to leave. The baskets were beautiful. One had flowers in it, exotic flowers from their display case. She would give that to the secretary. The other contained cigars, a box of chocolate, and a small bottle of bourbon. It was a very masculine basket. Annabelle handed Hillary her purse. "Just walk in there with confidence and you'll be fine. And if you're not, improvise," Rose added with a smile. Hillary was more than a little nervous. Asking questions about the case differed greatly from snooping around someone's office for information. "What if they won't let me into the office?" Hillary asked. "What do I do then?" "Create a diversion," Rose answered. Hillary looked around, searching for an idea as to what she could do, and her eyes fell on Spot. The parrot looked back at her with a glassy eye. If it came down to it, Hillary could always let the bird fly free to create a little chaos. And everyone who knew about the shop knew about Spot. It wouldn't be strange that she took him with her. It was perfect. "Let's go on an adventure," Hillary said, walking to Spot. "I think to die would be a great adventure," Spot squawked, mimicking Peter Pan. Rose and Annabelle laughed. "That's the last thing I need to hear from you," Hillary said, letting Spot perch on her shoulder. "Winner, winner, chicken dinner," Spot replied. Hillary shook her head, glanced over her shoulder at the other two, and then she was off with her baskets. The offices of Newmark and Lewis were luxurious, although nothing like the offices she'd been to after Matthew had died in the big city, but they still had a taste of small-town life to them. The smell of the ocean was thick in the air when Hillary pushed through the door. The building was one of the tallest buildings around, and it housed 4 different businesses. Comprising of the entire business district of Rosemary Harbor, it was the town's pride and joy. Once Hillary was in the lobby, complete with checkered floors and brown-paneled walls, she announced to the building's receptionist that she had a delivery for Mr. Lewis. They sent her up to the 6th floor without having to give any other explanation than showing her delivery clipboard. In the elevator, Spot flapped his wings without taking off. "Where are we going? What are we doing?" Spot asked. Hillary shook her head. "We're doing the right thing," she said to the parrot, trying to convince herself. She would not hurt anyone by finding out what Jessica had wanted to talk to Mr. Lewis about. She wanted answers to figure out the puzzle. On the 6th floor, the doors slid open, and Hillary walked across brown industrial carpets to a wooden desk with granite tops. "Can I help you?" the woman behind the desk asked. She had blood-red lips, blood-red fingernails, and a friendly smile. "I have a delivery for Mr. Lewis from a client. He's ordered through something special." Mr. Lewis is out at the moment. I'm his secretary. Can I sign for them? Hillary nodded. These are for you, she said, pointing to the basket with the flowers. The woman's face lit up. Oh, I don't usually get a gift. These are beautiful. They're from our new range, fresh in this morning. Spot tipped his head to the side. Just for you from the case, to win you over, Spot squawked. Hillary fought the urge to squirm. The bird would give her away. She stiffened, watching the secretary. But the woman laughed. You brought a sidekick, I see, she said. To keep away those lonely nights, Spot answered her, and the secretary laughed again. Hillary smiled. He's a real treasure, keeps things interesting, she said. Can I put this on Mr. Lewis' desk? It's always nice to get a surprise from a happy client. Of course, the secretary said. It's much better than me showing it to him the moment he walks through the door. Set it up on the desk, I'm sure you know what to do. Hillary nodded. This is what I do well, she said. The secretary picked up her flowers. I will get these in some water. I don't want them to wilt, they're so beautiful. Hillary smiled and watched the woman walk away. It would take her a while, Hillary hoped. She rushed to Mr. Lewis' office door, the one the secretary had gestured to when she'd suggested Hillary set it up herself. Once inside the office, Hillary closed the door behind her. The office was as luxurious as one would expect of a lawyer's office, with plush carpets, the same paneled walls as in the lobby, and a live plant in the corner. Paintings on the wall completed the picture. There was a lot of money to be made in divorce law. Mr. Lewis handled more than just divorce. Maybe having a finger in every pie did the trick. She put the basket on the desk. Where was she going to start? She had no idea what she was looking for. Spot flew off her shoulder and sat on the desk, watching her. What's up, Nancy Drew? Spot asked. First, Hillary looked through the papers on the desk. There were documents about anything and everything, and for a moment it looked like too much to sift through. A notepad with some question on the side caught her eye, questions about a prenup and a will with Danvers's name at the top. Hillary read through it. Although it wasn't much, it was something. She went through the drawers next, looking for a file of some sort. Nothing turned up, and Hillary was panicking that she was running out of time, that she would have to leave the office finding nothing at all. An upside-down hand can never be full, Spot commented. I don't even know what you're saying, Hillary hissed at the parrot. It was just being a nuisance. She should have left the bird at home. It was watching her, offering pointless commentary, and those little glass eyes seemed judgmental as the parrot followed her movements with quick jerks of his head. When there was nothing to be found in the desk drawers, Hillary spotted a file cabinet. She hurried over to it. They locked it, so she went through the drawers again, searching for a key. It took up a lot of time, but she needed to get into the cabinet. When she couldn't find a key, she decided she had to break into it. She eyed the paper clips on the desk, wondering if she could pick the lock. Someone locked the cabinet for a reason. There had to be important documents in it. Lovely, Hillary heard the secretary say on the other side of the door. She was back with her flowers, putting them on display, no doubt. Hillary was out of time. She wanted to look through the files, but she didn't want to get caught. Hillary grabbed Spot, and the parrot squawked his complaint. She opened the door and shoved him through it, letting him loose in Mr. Lewis' reception area. Hillary listened for the secretary to squeal before she hurried back, setting everything straight again. She wouldn't have enough time to break into the file cabinet. Spot was only going to buy her a few minutes. It was a pity. She wished she would have been able to find out more. The trip and the 2 gift baskets seemed to have offered nothing at all. Hillary fixed up the desk and laid out the basket so that it looked like it did in their shop display. When she was happy, she headed back to the door. She took a deep breath, thinking of a quick excuse about why she might have been in the office longer than expected, before she opened the door and stepped out of the office. The secretary sat on one of the chairs in the waiting area, looking disheveled and alarmed. Are you all right? Hillary asked, walking to her. What's wrong? Your bird escaped and caused chaos. I'm so sorry, Hillary said, looking around. When she couldn't see Spot, she frowned. Where is he? He headed down the stairwell, probably looking for someone else to torment when he got sick of me. The secretary sounded upset. Hillary couldn't blame her. Spot was a darling on a good day, but when he was in a mood, the bird could be a real pain. She felt bad for letting Spot out of the office to provide a distraction for her, but what was done was done. Hillary hurried toward the elevator and rode to the first floor before working her way back up the stairwell, hoping to catch Spot as he came down. She hoped she could find him before he left the building. He could be anywhere by now. She stopped on every floor, checking in with other businesses to find out if he'd disrupted their days. When she reached the top floor again, there was Spot, sitting on the windowsill just outside the offices of Newmark and Lewis, like he hadn't done a thing in the world. Lucy, I'm home, he said. Quiet, Hillary reprimanded him and let him sit on her shoulder again. Through the office doors, Hillary spotted Doris, the Danvers' housekeeper. What on earth would she be doing at the lawyer's office? It seemed like too much of a coincidence that she was here. She didn't need a lawyer. Unless Jessica had sent her on an errand. Still, seeing a lawyer was something Jessica would have wanted to handle in person. Hillary turned around, still deep in thought, when she crashed into a broad chest. Clean up on aisle 4, Spot squawked a moment before Hillary realized she'd run into Preston Davis. He stood in front of her, tall and broad and puzzled. Hello, Hillary, he said. His puzzled expression turned to one of suspicion. Oh, hello, Preston, she said. How are you? What are you doing here? He asked without answering her. She'd been poking her nose into his business, and he felt like this was more of the same. I delivered gift baskets for Mr. Lewis. Happy client, I believe. She smiled at Preston, who narrowed his eyes at her, not believing it. Hillary knew he would ask the secretary, and she knew that so far the woman would back up her story. She hoped Preston wouldn't find out more. He seemed unhappy to see her there, and she didn't want him to be mad at her. I have to go, she said. I still have a few more deliveries to take care of, and Rose and Annabelle are holding down the fort at the store. I'll see you around. Preston nodded as Hillary walked past him. I've got my eye on you, Spot said on Hillary's shoulder, looking back at Preston. It mortified Hillary. The parrot was saying things that were more and more impertinent, and she regretted bringing him with her. Although she had to admit that he had helped with a diversion when she'd needed it. It was a pity, though, that the whole thing had amounted to nothing. Chapter 8. Hillary left an unhappy Preston behind in the building of Newmark and Lewis, and headed out to her car. She still had more things to deliver for the shop, but after searching for clues, it wasn't as exciting. She was a little let down that she had found nothing interesting in the office. She'd hoped for something spectacular, a file that would divulge damning information, a reason Jessica would want to hide her alibi about being at the lawyer's offices on the day he died. She'd hoped deep down that she would be the one to crack the case. Preston had a whole team of officers investigating, she imagined, and Hillary was just a civilian. What would she be able to do? Although she had done quite a lot already, she felt. After delivering the last of her baskets, Hillary returned to something special. She parked and walked through the door with Spot on her shoulder, walking straight to his perch. You've created more than enough trouble for one day, she said to the bird, who hopped back into his cage. I could say the same for you, Preston said behind Hillary, and she spun around. Oh, I didn't expect you, Hillary said, her heart thudding in her chest. She glanced at Annabelle, who stood helpless behind the counter, and at Rose, who shrugged at her from the back of the shop. I imagine not, Preston said. He leaned on the counter with his elbow, his stance relaxed but his face tight with tension. He'd taken off his hat, and it lay on the counter next to him, his steel gray hair sticking up a little after wearing it. What were you doing at the law offices earlier? He was unhappy. He knew Hillary was up to something. Since he'd taken her along to see Lauren, she had gotten it in her head that she could help, and she'd been snooping around wherever she could. Preston liked Hillary. She was smart and funny, and her deductive reasoning was fantastic. But she wasn't a police officer, and he was uncomfortable with her being involved in his murder case. Maybe it was a matter of male pride, but he didn't like it. "I told you," Hillary said. "I was there to deliver 2 baskets from a client." "Yeah? Who was the client?" Preston asked. Hillary swallowed hard. She hadn't thought that far, hadn't expected Preston to question her about it. She had no idea who in town could have been clients to make up a name. "Yeah," Preston continued when Hillary couldn't answer him. "The secretary, Ms. Bricker, also has no clue who they're from. No card on either basket. And seeing that Mr. Lewis' clients are usually very clear to show who they are, that made me believe that the baskets were a front." Hillary didn't answer Preston. She wanted to deny it, but she didn't want to lie about it. Preston was her friend and an officer of the law. It was wrong in every way to pretend she'd been there with honest intentions. "Okay," she said. "You've got me. They were a front." She added nothing else to that. The way she saw it, she only had to answer his direct questions with direct answers. Preston had refused to give her information about Jessica and her alibi. If he would be like that about it, she would not tell him anything she knew either. At least, not until she was sure about what she knew. She didn't want to seem like a fool who was chasing a dead lead, and she knew that, since she wasn't in law enforcement, she was overstepping the line a little. Or a lot. Preston looked like he was getting angry. He shuffled his weight from one foot to the other and looked at Annabelle and Rose. "I suppose this also involved the 2 of you?" he asked them. Annabelle didn't answer. She wasn't involved as much as that she'd stumbled across information on Jessica's phone and related it to her mother. She had also helped prepare the baskets, and the 3 of them had agreed how Hillary would do it. She was burning with curiosity about what Hillary had found out, too. Something must have happened if Preston was here. He'd arrived a short while before Hillary, and he'd insisted he would wait until he could speak to her before saying anything. "What do I know?" Rose answered Preston. "I'm just an old gossip, picking up bits and pieces around town." She smiled at Preston, who sighed. He wouldn't get anything out of her. She had nothing new to offer. Everything she'd added to Hillary's little investigation was what she'd heard other people say around town. It wasn't necessary to do much sleuthing when people were so eager to talk about what they'd seen and heard. The tension in the shop was growing. Hillary wouldn't tell Preston anything, and Rose could see the man debate with himself about how much he should ask her for. If he asked for clues, he would admit that he needed the help, and that was a sore point for any man, let alone a police officer. If he didn't ask what she'd found out, he would look like he didn't need her, but he might miss out on clues that he could use. It was a beautiful catch-22 that only a man could get stuck in. Rose watched the 2, waiting to see how it played out. It was only a matter of who would give in first. Rose was willing to bet that Hillary would win this round. When she glanced at Annabelle, she guessed Annabelle thought the same. She was watching the 2 of them just as Rose was, her expression amused. Preston sighed. "Are we going to stand here all day?" he asked Hillary. He had to admire her tenacity. Hillary was a strong woman. He'd known that since just after meeting her. Anyone who could pick themselves up again and create a new life in a new town after losing a husband was made of the right stuff, but Hillary was going beyond that. She was headstrong, and that was always attractive in a woman. Unless it was against Preston, in which case it irritated him too. He wanted her to tell him what she knew, so he didn't have to ask her. He knew if he did, it would look like he needed her help then. Which he didn't want to admit. He didn't want to admit that he needed help from a civilian because he'd reached a wall in the investigation, and they had no idea who had killed Reginald Danvers. "I don't have time to stand here all day, unfortunately," Hillary said. Preston shook his head and ran his hand over his hair, trying to flatten it. Neither do I. He inhaled a deep breath and let it go. What did you find at the lawyer's offices? He asked. Hillary frowned, but the corners of her mouth were turning up in a smile. She couldn't help it. Preston had given in to her and she felt smug about it. A man rarely asked for help, and even though Preston wasn't admitting it in so many words, 3 women in the shop saw him concede. To be honest, she admitted, not much. I got into the office and looked around, but I couldn't get to the files in a locked cabinet. All I found were questions on the desk under Reginald's name about the kind of prenup they had and the will he might have left behind. She felt silly not being able to offer anything more after their little standoff. It made her wish she had more to give him. Those notes were what I asked Mr. Lewis about, Preston said. We found out that Reginald and Jessica were throwing around the D word, so I looked up the only divorce lawyer in town and worked backward from there. It's her alibi of the day, too, but I don't know why he wouldn't tell us that. Hillary nodded. We got that, too. She glanced at Annabelle. She felt like they had found out nothing. Preston had known everything that the 3 women had unearthed together, so they had done nothing more than the police had already done. So, we haven't found anything else? She asked. Hillary felt deflated. She was sure she had found out some things the police hadn't known, and that had felt good. Now, it came out Preston had known. He'd found it out differently, but he'd known. It was nothing. Hillary was wondering why she had gotten involved at all. And she dragged Annabelle and Rose into it too, by talking about it all the time. The women had never objected to being a part of it. It had been an excitement to everyone. Preston sighed, and he looked a little deflated too. It was understandable. It had been a hobby on the side to Hillary, but this was his career. Preston had always made a point of taking care of the citizens of Rosemary Harbor, and when he couldn't solve a crime, which hardly ever happened, he felt like he was letting his people down. They stuck him with this investigation, with no new evidence and suspects that seemed to have airtight alibis. Lauren had been busy, Jessica had been at a lawyer's office, and they had verified it. Their third suspect was Doris. She had insisted that Reginald light the candle. Her reason was valid, but it was suspect. And the dog running out. Doris had worked as a housekeeper for the Danvers for years. Preston had thought it strange from the start that she'd forgotten the gate was open, but everyone made mistakes. Being forgetful wasn't grounds for arrest. And anyway, why would she have wanted to kill her boss? I'm sorry there's nothing more, Hillary said. I think nothing I found would have been admissible though. It would be illegal because I was snooping, right? Preston chuckled. I didn't even think about that. I didn't expect you to raid the office itself. I thought you would only hang around to hear what you could pick up from the conversations in the office. Hillary shrugged. What could she say? She committed herself to whatever she put her mind to. I have to get going, ladies, Preston said. I have to see if there's anything else I can find. The further we move away from the murder, the less likely it is we'll find anything more. I need to use all the time I have. He nodded at Annabelle and Rose. I'll see you soon, Hillary, he said before walking out of the shop. See you later, alligator, Spot squawked. When he was gone, Hillary looked at Annabelle and Rose. That could have gone in a different direction, she said. It relieved her Preston hadn't been too upset about what she'd done. She didn't know if she could get charged for snooping or something, but using the baskets as a front to get into Mr. Lewis' office had been risky for sure. He left his hat, Annabelle said, picking up the police hat on the counter. You must return it to him. Me? Hillary asked. Annabelle nodded, smirking. Yeah, because he likes you. She batted her eyelashes and she and Rose laughed. Hillary rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help smiling. She knew Annabelle was only joking about it because she knew her mother wasn't serious about dating. The atmosphere in the shop was light despite their failures. Rose and Annabelle went to the back room, while Hillary walked behind the counter and retrieved a shelled peanut for Spot. He'd been a nuisance toward the end, but the bird had helped her with a diversion when she'd needed to buy some time, and he deserved a treat for that. Hillary sighed. She had envisioned herself solving a mystery, bringing Reginald's killer to justice, if for no other reason than to avenge Jessica's husband's death. The poor woman had looked so frail and beaten in the park when Annabelle and Hillary had spoken to her, and Hillary's heart went out to her. Spot nuzzled Hillary's hair the way he did when she was down. The parrot always seemed to know her mood, it was so much like Matthew had been. Her husband had also told her straight away if she wasn't okay, and he'd always tried to cheer her up. "Can I help you?" Spot asked in a woman's voice. "I'll be okay, Spot," Hillary said, scratching the parrot's head. "I want to find out about the money in Reginald's will." Now Spot was speaking in a different woman's voice. Hillary gaped at Spot. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm not at liberty to discuss it with you, I'm afraid," Spot said, using the first woman's voice again. And then the other. "I want to know if they can pay the money out before execution of the will? Just a small portion will be all right." Hillary frowned at Spot. The voices he mimicked were familiar. "Can I help you?" Spot started again. "I want to find out about the money in Reginald's will. I'm not at liberty to discuss it with you, I'm afraid. I want to know if they can pay the money out before execution of the will. Just a small portion will be all right." Hillary listened very carefully. She recognized the one voice to be that of the lawyer's secretary. But the other? Spot kept repeating the short conversation, and Hillary tried to place the voice until she flashed on an image of Doris standing at the secretary's desk when Spot had been sitting on the windowsill. Doris hadn't seen Hillary, or if she had, she hadn't cared. But Spot had been there the whole time, and he was mimicking the conversation. Why would Doris ask about the money from the will? "Rose," Hillary called, and the old woman came out of the back room. Spot kept quiet. "Do you know why Doris would need money?" she asked Rose. Rose frowned. "To pay off her gambling debt, no doubt. She lost all her savings when Reginald invested her money in a portfolio that went bad. The one I told you he kept bragging about not taking? He'd put her money in that and lost it all." Rose nodded as if confirming to herself. "Yeah, I think that's it." "Why?" Hillary shook her head, trying to put all the pieces together. It wasn't making sense to her. Doris was in Reginald's will. And she'd lost all her money. The pieces fell into place, and Hillary spun around, hurrying to the counter. "What is it?" Rose asked. "I have to find Preston," Hillary said, grabbing his hat. "Watch the shop." She flew out the door. Spot squawked something, but she didn't hear it. Preston was 2 blocks away, walking down the road. "Preston!" Hillary called and ran after him, waving the hat. Chapter 9. "Wait," Hillary called when Preston stopped and turned around, frowning. She ran until she reached him and handed him his hat. "Oh, thank you," he said. Hillary was breathing hard. She had sprinted to Preston, and even though she exercised twice a week with Annabelle, she wasn't full sprint running fit. She leaned her hands on her knees and tried to catch her breath. "What are you doing?" Preston asked, his face amused. "I know what happened with the case," Hillary said. Preston shook his head. "I think you should drop it, Hillary. We found everything we can find. Rather leave this up to the police now." "No," Hillary said, and Preston raised his eyebrows at the direct contradiction. "Just hear me out." Preston sighed and nodded. "Okay, hit me." Hillary took a deep breath. Doris accepted the basket from Rose when she hand-delivered it to the Danverses' place that day. She said that Doris kept insisting that Reginald light the candle to set the mood. "I heard about that," Preston said. Going over the clues again would not give them anything more than what they already had. "Just listen," Hillary said. Doris insisted again and again. That's what Rose said. And then the dog got out, causing Mr. Sheffield to run after it right at the time the explosion went off, so he didn't hear it. Preston frowned. Hillary had his attention now. She was painting a different picture than what he'd looked at until now. Go on, he said. Doris left the house to give them space, which was convenient because Jessica wasn't home yet, so Reginald was alone when the explosion happened. Preston nodded. I see the parallel you're drawing, and it makes sense if you put it that way, but we still don't have proof of any malicious intent. She could have forgotten to close the gate because something stressed her. She could have been sincere about setting the mood and then leaving to give them space. You're right, Hillary said. She would probably have been stressed about all the money Reginald lost when he invested her savings in a bad investment. One that he told everyone he wouldn't have dreamed of taking. Preston frowned. How did you know about that? He asked. Hillary shrugged. People talk. People like Rosé. But if Reginald had been bragging about his investments, it would have been common knowledge, especially in a town where everyone was in everyone's business. It has to be very inconvenient to lose all your savings when you're knee-deep in a gambling debt. Preston shook his head. Just because Doris had a pastime we don't agree with doesn't mean she's in debt. He knew Hillary was right, but Preston didn't want to drag Doris's name through the mud when she had a problem she couldn't help. Gambling was an addiction that needed professional help, just like substance abuse, and it wasn't grounds for arrest any more than it was to leave the gate open due to forgetfulness. Well, if she wasn't in debt, why would she ask about the money and Reginald's will to find out if they could release it to her before the execution of the will? Preston's frown deepened. What are you talking about? Where did you hear that? You told me that information I might have picked up if I overheard something at the office would have been admissible. Snooping wouldn't have been, but there's no law against overhearing a conversation when I'm in the vicinity, right? But you heard nothing, Preston said. He looked confused. I didn't, Hillary confirmed, but Spot did. He has a bad habit of picking up conversations or sounds and repeating them at inopportune moments. Or in this case, at just the right time. Preston shook his head. Let me see if I understand this. Spot told you that Doris was asking after the money? Why would I believe a parrot? Because he mimics voices, Preston, Hillary said. It's like a recording machine. That will hold up in court, won't it? Preston thought about it for a moment. Everything Hillary was saying made sense, even the part about the parrot's recording being evidence that could be used. Could it be that just when he'd thought that nothing was working out, everything had fallen into place? It was almost too good to be true. Let's assume all of this is accurate, that your parrot can catch people in the act by mimicking their conversation. It is strange that Doris forgot to close the gate when everyone in town knows that dog is a flight risk. The animal runs away any chance it gets. As far as I know, it doesn't lie in the garden, see an open gate, and make a run for it. It waits at the gate until the gate opens, and then it bolts the minute it's free. Doris would have noticed that and run after the dog herself. Unless she'd done it on purpose, Hillary finished. And Mr. Sheffield can't help himself. He's an animal lover. Once that dog is out, he has to run after it, every time. If I lived on that street, I would have just let the animal run away ages ago. No, I wouldn't have, but you know what I mean. Hillary nodded. She hadn't known about Mr. Sheffield, but she'd been thinking that someone had let the dog out on purpose the moment she put all the pieces together. I will have to see the parrot repeat the conversation for myself, Preston said. Hillary nodded. Of course. Come with me, we'll do it right now. Preston nodded. There wasn't a moment to lose. If the parrot had said all this, that they had uncovered a vital clue in the last 5 minutes, they had enough to bring Doris in for questioning again and convict her of the murder. It was horrible to think someone like Doris Tanner was capable of such a thing, but Preston had learned early in his career that nothing was impossible. Hillary speed-walked with Preston back to the shop. Rose and Annabelle were curious about what was happening when Hillary arrived with Preston in tow. Rose had told Annabelle that Hillary had run out of the shop, and Annabelle had popped her head out of the door just after, confirming that Hillary and Preston had been standing and talking further up the street. Annabelle had worried that it was something personal between the two, that she had relaxed about Preston and Hillary not dating when she shouldn't have. When Hillary walked in, though, she didn't look infatuated. She looked determined. So did Preston. "What's up, monkey butt?" Spot squawked when Preston stood in front of him. "Charming," Preston said. "Come on, Spot, tell Preston what you told me." Spot ruffled his feather. "Polly, want a cracker?" Preston looked at Hillary. She groaned. Spot had chosen now to make fun of her. It was the worst timing ever. "Wait," Hillary said, diving behind the counter to retrieve a few unsalted almonds. She fed them to Spot the way she had when he'd talked. Spot complied. "Can I help you?" he asked in the secretary's voice. Preston exchanged glances with Hillary as Spot ran through the conversation again. "That's impressive," Preston said when the parrot was done. Hillary grinned at Preston. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked. Preston nodded. Spot launched into another repeat of the conversation, proud of himself now that he had an audience. Hillary tried to make him stop, but the parrot kept running through the conversation again and again. The shop door opened, the little bell announcing a customer, and Doris Tanner stepped in. Everyone held their breath as Doris froze, hearing the conversation. The smile on her face faded, and she looked bewildered. She spun around and tried to yank open the door again, but she bumped against it and couldn't get out quick enough. Preston grabbed her by the arm, easy but hard enough to make a point. Doris struggled to get away, but she couldn't. "What is this?" she asked, and it sounded like she was on the verge of tears. "I am in debt. I've got bad people coming after me, and I need the money right now. It's not wrong when Reggie left me money, is it?" "You're under arrest, Doris Tanner," Preston said. "For what? Being in debt? If that was a crime, you would have to arrest almost the entire American population." Preston shook his head. This was the part of his job he hated the most, arresting the perpetrator. He loved being able to solve the mysteries, to close a case, but he hated having to cuff someone and send them to a cell where they would be for a very long time. They punished murderers for taking a human life by spending their own lives in a cell, but it still felt horrible to be the one to do it. "You're under arrest for the murder of Reginald Danvers. Everything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, the state will provide one for you. Do you understand your rights as I have read them to you?" Preston asked, reading Doris her Miranda rights. She nodded, sullen. Hillary stood gaping at Doris. The woman looked small, shrunken in on herself. When she had seen her with Jessica at Wine's Up a few nights ago, the housekeeper had seemed just as distraught as Jessica, and Hillary had believed they both mourned the death of their loved one. It turned out that Doris had murdered Reginald, and even though Hillary had been the one to put two and two together, it was hard to imagine that someone she had brushed shoulders with several times could take the life of another. When Preston cuffed Doris, it was like it hit home, and she realized she was being arrested for murder. "He lost all my money," Doris cried out, tears spilling over her cheeks. "He lost all of it, and then he told everyone how he knew money, how he would never have put money into that investment. Do you know how much it hurts to be betrayed like that, to feel you can trust someone only for him to ruin your life?" The three women didn't answer her. They didn't know what to say. "What was I supposed to do?" she cried out. Preston took Doris to his police cruiser a few blocks down the road and drove her to the police station, where she would be held until they could take the next steps in convicting her. When they were gone, Hillary looked at Annabelle and Rose. She was happy that they had solved the mystery, but Doris's pleas dampened it, by her obvious pain. "This doesn't feel as good as I thought it would," Hillary said. Rose nodded. Annabelle stepped closer and hugged her mom. Chapter 10. Preston stepped out of the police station the next Monday afternoon and breathed in the fresh sea breeze that wafted through the little town. The sun was out, birds chirped, and everything had gone back to normal. Reginald's funeral had been that weekend. Everyone in town had attended, except Doris, who was in custody. Jessica had cried and cried when Preston had told her the news about Doris and what had happened to her husband. It would take a while for the woman to work through her husband's death, and Preston had suggested Jessica see a bereavement counselor. He hoped she would take his advice. Now that they'd solved the mystery, Preston could breathe easy. For a moment in the investigation, he had felt that he would never figure it out. He had to admit to himself that it was thanks to Hillary and her constant involvement in places where she shouldn't have been that had helped him solve it. Hillary and that damn parrot. Preston had gone back with a tape recorder after they had arrested Doris to record the parrot. He'd taken a video with his phone as well. It had worried him that the parrot would forget the words he'd learned by the time the court date came up. After he'd done that, he'd gotten a sworn statement from Ms. Bricker, the secretary, that Doris had asked about the money in the will, and they set their evidence for court. Preston was happy not to be involved in the legal part of the process. It was bad enough having to arrest criminals and know that people were capable of such atrocities. He didn't want to argue about it in front of a judge. Preston made his way to something special after leaving the station. When he walked through the door, Spot flapped his wings. "He's a ladies' man," he said. Preston chuckled. He held a spray of wildflowers in his hand that he'd gotten from an obliging field. "Hello, Preston," Hillary said, smiling. He handed her the flowers and she took them from him, smelling them. "These are lovely." Preston glanced at the case with exotic flowers. They'd all come from a hothouse, and he'd suspected she would like these more. Annabelle and Rose came out of the back room. Annabelle eyed the flowers, but Preston couldn't tell if she was unhappy about them. Rose winked at Hillary. "So, everything's wrapped up?" Hillary asked. She'd attended Reginald's funeral at the small cemetery and had been glad that the man could finally rest in peace now that his killer had been found. "It is," Preston said. "And those flowers are for you as thanks." Hillary smiled, putting them in a vase. "For what?" she asked. Preston shook his head, smiling. She was acting coy. "I didn't expect you to immerse yourself in the case, even after I told you to back off. I'm glad you did. If it weren't for you, all of you," he looked at the three ladies, "we might never have been able to solve this case. This will go to trial, and Doris will get her punishment." Hillary's smile faded. She still felt for Doris. The woman took the wrong course, there was no arguing that, but she'd been desperate and didn't see another way out. She'd known she was in Reginald's will, so there was money to be had, and her need for money and her rage combined made for the perfect revenge plan. Or so she'd thought. "Well, it's a pleasure, Preston," Hillary said. "We're all happy to help." Preston fished in his pocket for an almond. He wiped the lint off and walked to Spot. "And this is for old Trusty over here who can't keep his mouth shut." Spot ate it. "More?" he asked, and everyone laughed. Preston turned back to Hillary. "I must ask you not to get this involved again, Hillary," Preston said a little more sternly. "I don't need a civilian detective on the loose in my town. It's not the right way to go about it, and you were lucky you didn't get into more trouble than you could get out of." Hillary nodded. "I know. I won't get too involved again. I don't like calling this much attention to myself anyway." She smiled at Preston. She was telling him what he needed to hear, but if the same thing happened again, she would act in the same way. Something in her gut told her that she had made a bad decision to stay normal, uninvolved. She felt alive solving the case, and it was a thrill when all the pieces fit together. If it happened again, she would be right in there, under everyone's feet, right where she didn't belong. She was starting a new life, a new chapter after Matthew. Who was to say this wasn't who she was now? "Well, I better be off," Preston said. There's no immediate crime to solve, but the duties of a police officer never end. I came to thank you. Is that all? Rose asked, speaking up for the first time. Preston blinked. It wasn't all, in fact, but he felt unsure about asking Hillary in front of Annabelle. As if Rose knew, she called Annabelle to the back room with her, telling her she needed help with something. Annabelle followed Rose, leaving Hillary and Preston alone. I know you said you wanted to be friends, and I respect that, Preston said. But if I can convince you otherwise, would you give me a chance? Hillary thought about it. If Preston could convince her, then there would be no harm in trying for romance again. You would have to do a superb job to convince me. I'm not easily swayed. Preston nodded, grinning. This sounded like a challenge to him, and he never backed down from a challenge. He liked Hillary and he wanted to pursue her, and if he had to win her over, he would try to do so. Well, how about we start slow as friends, he asked. He wanted to spend time with Hillary, get to know her as a person. Maybe if she got to know him too, she would change her mind. And it would be a good thing to take it slow, to let Annabelle warm up to the thought of him. Then he was sure he could win her over. For now, though, he was happy to have Hillary as a friend. A friend who wasn't sore on the eyes to look at. A friend he liked to spend time with just a little more than all his other friends. How about we start off with a coffee? Preston asked. Minus the crime. Hillary laughed and nodded. I'd like that, she said. But if there was a crime involved, Hillary wouldn't complain. Coffee with a dash of crime, that sounded good to her. Thanks for listening to Winds Up, Book 1 from Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. For more information on Wendy's available books, visit www.wendymeadows.com.